The frozen Montana night held its breath when Evelyn Carter found the dying cowboy in her barn, blood seeping through his shirt, ice crystals in his dark hair. "Don't tell anyone I'm here," he gasped, desperation cracking his voice. She should have refused, should have turned away this dangerous stranger who'd brought violence to her doorstep. But as their eyes met in the flickering lantern light, something shifted in her solitary heart. "Who'd I tell?" she whispered back, sealing both their fates. Before we begin this tale of desperate courage and unexpected love, I invite you to journey with me through every moment of Evelyn and Cole's story. Stay until the very end to discover how a frozen winter night changed two lives forever. And please, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel, connecting hearts across the miles. The wind that winter night didn't merely blow, it screamed, tearing across the Montana plains with the fury of something alive and hunting. It rattled the windows of the Carter homestead until the glass sang with tension, pushed against the walls like invisible hands seeking entry, and sent snow spiraling in wild, dervish patterns that erased the world beyond the porch in sheets of white. Inside the small farmhouse, Evelyn Carter sat before the dying fire, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders, listening to the storm wage its war against the silence she'd grown accustomed to. 3 months had passed since they'd laid her father in the frozen ground up on Cedar Hill. 3 months since the pneumonia had stolen him away and left her alone on this 160 acres of stubborn Montana earth. She was 24 years old, unmarried, and according to the church ladies in Granite Creek, in a precarious situation. That's what Mrs. Henderson had called it, her voice dripping with concern that felt more like judgment. "A young woman alone, so far from town. It's not proper, dear. Not safe." Evelyn had smiled politely and said nothing, because what was there to say? That she'd been running this homestead alongside her father since her mother died when she was 12? That she could shoot straight, deliver a calf, mend a fence, and doctor a horse better than half the men in the county? That proper was a luxury for women who had choices, and she had land to keep and a promise to honor? Her father's last words echoed in her mind as they did every night. "Don't let them take this from you, Evie. Your grandfather died clearing these fields. I've given my life to them. This land is our name, our blood. Promise me." She'd promised, even as she'd watched the light fade from his eyes. Now the fire crackled low, and Evelyn considered the cold walk to the woodpile versus another hour wrapped in blankets. The wind answered for her with a particularly vicious gust that sent a shower of snow down the chimney, hissing against the embers. She sighed, unwrapped herself, and had just reached for her boots when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. She froze, one boot halfway on, her breath suddenly loud in her ears. There it was again, a thump, muffled by distance and wind, but distinct, coming from the barn. Evelyn's hand went automatically to the rifle above the fireplace, her father's Winchester, oiled and loaded as he'd taught her. "Out here," he used to say. "The law is a day's ride away. You be ready to be your own law, girl." She pulled on her coat, wrapped a scarf around her face, and lit the oil lantern with steady hands, despite the sudden hammering of her heart. The last time someone had come around at night had been 2 years ago. 3 drifters looking for easy pickings, thinking a farmer and his daughter would be simple prey. Her father had met them on the porch with that same Winchester, and Evelyn had stood beside him with the shotgun. The drifters had left without testing their luck, but her father wasn't on the porch anymore. The cold hit her like a physical blow when she opened the door, stealing her breath and making her eyes water instantly. The snow was knee-deep on the path to the barn, and she had to fight for every step, the lantern swinging wildly and casting dancing shadows across the white landscape. The barn door hung half open, banging against its frame. That was the sound she'd heard. She'd secured it before dark. She was certain of it. Someone or something had opened it. "Hello?" she called out, but the wind tore the word away unheard. Evelyn pushed into the barn, and the comparative stillness was almost shocking. The wind howled outside, but the thick log walls held most of it at bay. Her 2 cows, Bess and Molly, stood in their stalls, nervous and wide-eyed. Her father's old gelding, Sam, nickered softly. "Easy," she murmured, raising the lantern high. That's when she saw the blood. Dark droplets in the hay, leading toward the back corner where they kept the extra feed. Her finger found the rifle's trigger, and she moved forward slowly, the lantern held high in her left hand, the Winchester ready in her right. "I know you're here," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Show yourself, or I'll assume you mean harm and act accordingly." Silence. Then a sound, something between a groan and a gasp. She rounded the corner, and there he was. A man, collapsed in the hay, his dark coat soaked with snow and something darker. Blood. His hat had fallen off, revealing dark hair plastered to his head, and even in the dim light she could see he was shaking, violent tremors that spoke of cold that had gone bone deep. "Please," he managed through chattering teeth. His eyes found hers. Blue eyes, she noticed, even in the lamplight, desperate and glazed with pain. "Please, don't tell anyone I'm here." Evelyn should have backed away, should have kept the rifle trained on him and demanded answers, should have recognized the danger in harboring a bleeding stranger who was hiding from someone or something in the middle of a Montana blizzard. Instead, she heard herself say, "Who'd I tell?" The absurdity of it struck her even as the words left her mouth. It was midnight in a snowstorm. She lived 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, and the town was a 2-hour ride in good weather. Even if she wanted to tell someone, she couldn't. She knelt beside him, setting the lantern down and keeping the rifle close. "Are you shot?" He nodded, his jaw clenched tight against the shaking. "Left side. Went through, I think, a few hours ago." "You've been out here for hours?" She pushed his coat aside and found his shirt soaked with blood. The wound was in his side, just above his hip. "You're lucky you're not dead." "Don't feel particularly lucky," he managed, and despite everything, there was a ghost of humor in his voice. "Can you stand?" "Tried. Couldn't." Evelyn made a decision that would change everything. She set the rifle down, but not out of reach, and slipped her arm under his shoulders. "Then you'll lean on me. The house isn't far, and you'll freeze to death out here before sunrise." "Dangerous men," he whispered as she hauled him to his feet, his weight nearly buckling her knees. He was tall and solid, a working man's build. "Hunting me. You should let me go. Safer." "Safer than having a dead man in my barn for the sheriff to question me about?" She grunted under his weight as they began the agonizing shuffle toward the door. "I think not. Besides, I didn't survive this winter alone to lose my nerve over a bleeding cowboy." "Cowboy," he repeated, almost laughing. "That's generous. I'm just a hand, was a hand, at the Double J." The name meant nothing to her, but she filed it away. They made it 3 steps before he nearly went down, his legs giving out. Evelyn caught him, surprising herself with her own strength. Years of farm work had built muscles the church ladies told her were unladylike. "Stay with me," she commanded. "You don't get to die in my barn without my permission, understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he breathed, and she felt him gather himself, pushing through the pain. The journey to the house took an eternity. The snow fought them for every inch, and twice she thought they'd both go down in the drifts. But Evelyn Carter was her father's daughter. She'd learned stubbornness before she'd learned to walk, and she refused to let this stranger die because she wasn't strong enough. They crashed through her front door in a tumble of snow and blood. She kicked it shut behind them and half-dragged him to her father's bed. She'd been sleeping in her own small room off the kitchen since the funeral, unable to face the empty space where he'd died. "On the bed," she ordered, and he collapsed onto it with a groan that spoke of relief and agony in equal measure. Now, in the better light of the oil lamps, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was perhaps 30, give or take, with a strong jaw dark with days-old stubble, and those striking blue eyes that watched her with a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. His clothes were worn but well cared for, a working man's outfit. His hands, she noticed as he clutched his side, were calloused from rope and reins. "I need to see the wound," she said, already moving to the kitchen for her father's medical supplies. He'd kept a kit for injuries that were too minor for a 3-hour round trip to the doctor. "I'm getting blood on your bed," he said weakly. "Then you'd better not die on it too, because that would be even harder to clean." Despite everything, she saw his mouth twitch toward a smile. She returned with the kit, a basin of water she'd kept warming on the hearth, and clean cloths. "This is going to hurt." "Can't hurt worse than getting shot," he said, but his voice was tight with anticipation. He was wrong. When she peeled back his shirt, the fabric stuck to the wound with dried blood. He made a sound deep in his throat that was purely animal, but he didn't cry out and he didn't pull away. His hands fisted in the blankets, and sweat broke out on his forehead despite the cold that still clung to him. "You were right," Evelyn said after a moment's examination. "It went through. Missed anything immediately vital, though you've lost a lot of blood." She began cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. Her father had taught her this too. They'd doctored enough injured animals over the years, and the principles weren't so different. "You need a real doctor, but you're not getting one tonight." "Can't," he gasped. "Can't risk it. They'll find me." "These dangerous men you mentioned." She threaded a needle with steady hands. "What did you do to make them want to kill you?" "Try to do the right thing," he said, and there was such bitter regret in his voice that she looked up from her work. "Always try to do the right thing. Never seems to work out. Hold still." She began to stitch, and to his credit, he barely flinched. "Tell me what happened. If you're going to bleed on my father's bed, I think I deserve a story." He was silent for a long moment, and she thought he might refuse. But then, perhaps because he needed something to focus on besides the needle piercing his flesh, or perhaps because he sensed that she was risking something by helping him, he began to talk. "There's a woman," he started, and Evelyn felt an unexpected twinge of something that might have been disappointment. "Mrs. Sarah Lockwood, widow, about 40, with a small ranch bordering the Double J. Her husband died last spring, horse rolled on him, and she's been trying to run the place herself with just one hired hand." Evelyn nodded, understanding. She knew what that was like. "Theodore Jackson owns the Double J," the cowboy continued, his voice sometimes catching when the needle bit deep. "Biggest spread in the county, 5,000 acres, 100 head of cattle, 20 hands. He's been trying to buy out Mrs. Lockwood for months, says her water rights are messing with his grazing rotation. And she won't sell. Would you?" Evelyn thought of her father's last words, of the 3 generations of Carters who'd bled into this land. No, neither would she, so Jackson decided to persuade her. His jaw tightened, and not from the stitching. 3 nights ago, some of his men, including his foreman, a bastard named Decker, rode out to her place. They were going to burn her out, make it look like an accident with a lamp. Evelyn's hands stilled. "They told you this?" "I heard them planning it. I was in the bunkhouse when Decker came in, choosing his men. I tried to talk him out of it, tried to say it was murder if Mrs. Lockwood was inside, that we'd all hang if we were caught." He laughed bitterly. "Decker said that's why he wasn't picking me, said I was soft. They left me behind." "But you went anyway." "I rode fast, got there first. Mrs. Lockwood didn't want to believe me, thought I was trying to trick her into leaving so Jackson could claim abandonment. I was still trying to convince her when I saw the torches coming up the road." Evelyn resumed stitching, but she was listening intently now. "I got her out through the back, put her on her horse, told her to ride for Granite Creek, to the sheriff. Then I fired a shot into the air, had to make them think someone was defending the place, buy her time." His eyes closed, remembering. "Decker and his boys came in hard, found me in the barn. I shot out the lantern, and in the confusion, managed to get to my horse. But Decker got a shot off as I cleared the fence. And you've been running ever since." "Been running and hiding. Couldn't go back to the Double J, couldn't go to town. Decker would have men watching the roads. I was trying to make it to the next county, find a sheriff Jackson doesn't own, when the storm hit." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Your barn was the first shelter I'd seen in hours. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought this to your door." Evelyn tied off the last stitch and began bandaging the wound. "This Mrs. Lockwood, you think she made it to town?" "I pray she did. If she didn't, if Decker caught her..." He didn't finish the sentence. "And if she did make it, if she told the sheriff, then Decker is riding with a posse hunting for me, to shut me up before I can confirm her story." His hand caught hers, and she felt the calluses and the tremor of cold still in him. "You really should turn me out. Come sunrise, they'll be searching every building for 20 miles. Evelyn looked down at their hands, his large and rough, hers smaller but equally work-worn. She thought about her father, about the promises made and the choices that defined a person. She thought about Mrs. Lockwood, alone and desperate, trying to hold on to her dead husband's legacy. She thought about being a woman alone in a hard land and what it meant to help or to turn away. I lived in this house for 24 years, she said quietly. My father built it with his own hands when he married my mother. She died in that bedroom when I was 12, bringing my brother into the world. He didn't survive either. My father worked himself to exhaustion keeping this land, and when the pneumonia took him last November, I held his hand and promised him I wouldn't let anyone drive me off. She met the cowboy's eyes. I know what it means to fight for what's yours. I know what it means to stand against people who think they can take what they want because they're bigger and stronger and richer. She released his hand and stood, gathering the bloody cloths. So no, I'm not turning you out. You stay until this storm passes and you're well enough to ride. And if Decker comes knocking, we'll handle it. You don't even know my name, Shas, he said softly. No, she agreed. I don't. Cole Maddox. Evelyn Carter. She nodded toward the bed. Welcome to the Carter homestead, Mr. Maddox. Try not to die in your sleep. I've had enough death in this house to last a lifetime. Despite the pain he must have been feeling, despite the danger and the cold and the blood loss, Cole Maddox smiled. It was a real smile, reaching his eyes, transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made Evelyn's heart skip in a way she wasn't prepared for. I'll do my best, Miss Carter. She turned away, busying herself with cleaning up, acutely aware of how small the house suddenly felt with another person in it. It had been just her for 3 months, and before that, just her and her dying father for weeks. The presence of a vital, living man, even a wounded one, changed the very air. You should rest, she said, keeping her back to him. I'll bank the fire and keep watch. You don't have to... Mr. Maddox, she interrupted, finally turning to face him. You're running from men who want to kill you. You've lost enough blood to fill a bucket, and there's a blizzard raging outside that shows no signs of stopping. I think sleeping might be the least of your concerns, but someone needs to stay awake in case that fever I see starting in your eyes gets worse. I know this house, I know how to tend the sick, and I've been managing alone for months, so yes, I do have to. He studied her for a long moment, and she felt assessed in a way that was different from how the men in town looked at her. They saw a young woman, a potential wife, an anomaly to be either pursued or pitied. Cole Maddox saw something else, an equal, perhaps, or at least someone to be taken seriously. You're not what I expected, he said finally. When you stumbled into my barn bleeding and begging for shelter, what exactly were you expecting? I don't know. Not someone who'd risk harboring a fugitive. Not someone who could stitch a gunshot wound without flinching. He paused. Not someone like you. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned away again. Yes, well, Montana makes us tough or kills us. I wasn't ready to die yet. She heard him shift on the bed, settling in with a groan. Thank you, Miss Carter. I won't forget this kindness. Thank me when you're healed and gone, she said, pulling a chair close to the fire and wrapping herself in a quilt. Thank me when Decker and his men ride past without stopping. Thank me when you're safe. Within minutes, she heard his breathing even out, though it was rough and labored. The fever she'd seen starting in his eyes would get worse before it got better. Bullet wounds almost always brought fever, her father had told her, even when they were cleaned properly. She'd need to watch him through the night, be ready to cool him down if he got too hot, to pile blankets on him if the chills took hold. The wind continued to howl around the house, and snow built up against the windows like nature itself was trying to seal them in. Evelyn fed the fire and listened to Cole's breathing, to the storm, to the creaking of the house settling around them. She thought about dangerous men riding through the night, about a woman fleeing to town with a desperate story, about the choice she'd made to pull a bleeding stranger from her barn instead of leaving him to freeze. Her father used to say that every life was a series of moments where you chose who you were going to be, coward or hero, cruel or kind, selfish or generous. He'd said that Montana tested those choices harder than anywhere else, that the land demanded you be genuine because anything false wouldn't survive the winters. I hope I chose right, Papa, she whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of the man who'd raised her. The fire crackled in response, and from the bed, Cole Maddox shivered in the grip of rising fever. And outside, the storm raged on. Around 2 in the morning, the fever spiked. Evelyn had been dozing in her chair when Cole cried out, a sound of pain and delirium that brought her instantly awake. She rushed to the bed and found him thrashing, his skin burning hot to the touch, sweat soaking through the blankets. "No," he was muttering. "Can't let them. Sarah, run! Have to run." "Mr. Maddox," Evelyn said firmly, trying to still his hands. "Cole, you're safe. You're at the Carter homestead. You're safe." But he didn't hear her. He was somewhere else, reliving that night, fighting his way out of Decker's trap again and again. Evelyn had nursed her father through his final illness. She knew fever, knew its dangers. Moving quickly, she fetched cold water from the kitchen pump. It came up half frozen, which was perfect, and returned with cloths and the basin. She had to peel back the sweat-soaked blankets and unbutton his shirt to reach his chest and neck, where the fever burned hottest. In the lamplight, she could see he was lean and muscled from years of hard work, his skin marked with the scars of a life spent outdoors, rope burns on his hands, a long white line across his ribs that spoke of some old injury, smaller marks she couldn't identify. "Easy," she murmured, bathing his face and neck with the cold cloths. "Easy, Cole. The fever has you, but it will pass. It will pass." She worked through the early morning hours, changing cloths as they warmed from his skin, speaking to him in a low, steady voice, even though she knew he couldn't hear her. She told him about the homestead, about her father and mother, about the life she'd lived here. She told him things she'd never told anyone, words spilling out in the intimate darkness, shared with a stranger who would never remember them. "Sometimes I'm so lonely I forget how to talk," she admitted as she pressed a fresh cloth to his forehead. "I go days without speaking aloud. The animals don't care, and there's no one else to hear. Papa used to fill up all the silence, always had a story or a lesson or a joke. Now there's just quiet, and sometimes I think the quiet will swallow me whole." Cole's hand suddenly caught hers, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so fevered. His eyes open, but they were glazed and unfocused. "Don't be lonely," he murmured. "Too good to be lonely." Then his eyes closed again, and his grip loosened, and Evelyn found herself holding his hand in both of hers, feeling the rapid pulse at his wrist. "You don't even know me," she whispered. But she didn't let go. The fever broke just before dawn. Evelyn knew the moment it happened because she'd been watching him so intently that she caught the instant his breathing changed, becoming deeper and more natural. The tight lines of pain around his eyes eased, and some of the color returned to his face. She sagged in her chair with relief so profound it made her dizzy. Then, because she was practical above all things, she checked his bandages, found them clean, checked his wound, found it showing no signs of infection, and finally allowed herself to believe he would survive. The storm was still raging outside when she returned to her chair, but the house felt different now. Warmer somehow. Less empty. She must have fallen asleep because she woke to find pale morning light struggling through the snow-blocked windows and a pair of blue eyes watching her with clear awareness. "Morning," Cole said, his voice rough but lucid. "Did I survive?" Evelyn sat up, rubbing her neck where it had kinked. "Barely. Your fever spiked around 2. You've been out since then." "And you stayed up all night watching me?" "Someone had to. You were ranting about running and burning barns and someone named Sarah." He winced. "Sorry." "Don't apologize for delirium." She stood, stretching muscles stiff from the awkward sleeping position. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot and then dragged through a snowstorm." "Accurate." She moved to the kitchen area, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "Can you keep down broth?" "I can try." She had soup bones from the chicken she'd butchered 2 days ago, and she put them on to simmer with vegetables from her root cellar. While the broth cooked, she went to check on the animals, fighting through snow that had drifted nearly to her waist in places. The barn was cold but secure. She fed and watered the animals, milked the cows, and gathered the eggs from the chickens that roosted in the loft. Normal tasks, the everyday rhythm of farm life. Except nothing was normal anymore, because there was a wanted man in her father's bed and dangerous riders somewhere out in the storm. When she returned to the house, Cole had managed to sit up, though he was pale and sweating from the effort. "You shouldn't be moving," she scolded, setting down her burdens. "Couldn't just lie there while you did all the work. You were shot yesterday. I think lying there is exactly what you should be doing. It's not yesterday anymore." "Fine. You were shot the day before yesterday. Better?" He smiled, and again she felt that odd flutter in her chest. "Much better." She served him broth and a piece of bread, watching as he ate slowly but with determination. Good. If he could keep food down, he was truly on the mend. "The storm doesn't look like it's letting up," Cole observed, glancing at the snow-blocked windows. "No, we're stuck here for at least another day, maybe two." "I'm sorry." "For what? The weather?" She sipped her own broth. "I've been snowed in before. We have food, we have heat, we have shelter. We'll manage." "I meant for bringing danger to your door." Evelyn set down her cup and looked at him directly. "Mr. Maddox, Cole, I made a choice last night. I could have left you in the barn to freeze, or I could help you. I chose to help. That wasn't about you, not really. That was about who I want to be, who my father raised me to be. So stop apologizing." He held her gaze, and she saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe, or gratitude, or something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Your father raised a remarkable woman," he said quietly. "He raised a stubborn one," she corrected. "Remarkable remains to be seen." The day passed slowly, the storm still howling outside, the two of them trapped together in the small house. Cole slept most of the time, his body demanding rest to heal. When he was awake, they talked. Careful conversation at first, dancing around the dangerous topics. But as the hours wore on, they began to open up. He told her about growing up in Kansas, about a father who drank and a mother who died young, about drifting west looking for work and finding it on the Double J. He told her about the other hands, about the long days riding fence and moving cattle, about sleeping under stars and eating trail dust. She told him about her childhood on the homestead, about learning to ride before she could read, about her mother's garden and her father's stories. She told him about the loneliness after they died, about the struggle to keep the ranch running alone, about the town folks who pitied her and the men who thought a woman alone was an invitation. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked as evening fell on that first full day together. "Selling the place? Moving somewhere easier?" "Every day," she admitted, "and every day I decide to stay. This is my family's legacy. This is everything they worked for. If I leave, all that work, all that sacrifice, it means nothing. It means you survived. That has to count for something." "Maybe." She stared into the fire. "But it doesn't feel like enough." That night, as the storm continued its assault, Evelyn slept in her own room for the first time in days, leaving Cole in her father's bed. But she kept her door open, listening for any sign that his fever had returned or that he needed help. She lay in the darkness, aware of another person breathing in the next room, and found it comforting in a way she hadn't expected. On the second day, Cole was strong enough to sit up without help, to eat solid food, to carry on longer conversations without tiring. The storm had finally started to ease, though snow still fell steadily, adding to the already impressive accumulation. They fell into an easy rhythm. Evelyn would go out to tend the animals while Cole rested, then they'd share breakfast and talk. She'd read while he slept, then make lunch. Afternoon would bring more conversation, sometimes about their pasts, sometimes about the present situation. "Do you think Mrs. Lockwood made it to the sheriff?" Evelyn asked as she changed his bandages on that second afternoon. "I have to believe she did," Cole said. "The alternative is that Decker caught her, and if that's true—" He trailed off, his jaw tight. "If that's true, they'll kill her to keep her quiet, and you're the only witness." "Yes," Evelyn finished the bandaging. "Then we hope she made it, and we prepare for what happens when the storm clears and Decker comes looking." "I won't let them hurt you," Cole said fiercely. "If they come, I'll go willingly. I won't let you get caught in the middle of this." "Too late for that. I'm already in the middle of it." She met his eyes. "Besides, this is my land. If anyone needs defending here, it's you, not me." "You're serious?" "As the grave. I told you, Montana makes us tough." She stood, gathering the soiled bandages. "I can shoot, I can fight, and I'm not about to let Theodore Jackson's hired guns intimidate me on my own property." Cole stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. I believe you. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Cole in a chair now, growing stronger by the hour, he asked her about her dreams. "What do you want, Evelyn?" he said. "Beyond keeping this land, what do you want for yourself?" No one had ever asked her that before. The question caught her off guard, and for a long moment she didn't answer. "I want," she finally said, "not to be alone. I want someone who sees me as a partner, not as someone to be protected or pitied. I want to build something that matters. I want—" She paused, feeling vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. "I want to not be afraid anymore." Afraid of what? That I'll fail, that I'll let my parents down, that I'll wake up one day and realize I've spent my whole life fighting for something that doesn't matter to anyone but me. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It matters to you. That makes it matter." Something in his voice made her look up, and she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What do you want?" she asked, deflecting the moment. "After all this is over, what will you do?" "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "Before this, I just wanted honest work and a place to lay my head. But now," he looked at her, "now I think I want more than that. I think I want what you described. A partner. Something to build. A reason to stay in one place instead of drifting." The fire crackled between them, and outside the wind finally began to die down. On the third morning, Evelyn woke to silence. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine and still, the kind of stillness that comes only after a Montana blizzard has exhausted itself. She found Cole already awake, standing at the window despite the fact that he should still be resting. He'd managed to dress himself in a clean shirt she'd found in her father's trunk. It fit him well enough, though it was a bit large in the shoulders. "Storm's over," he said without turning. "Yes." She joined him at the window, looking out at the drifts that rose halfway up the fence posts, which means Decker will be riding soon if he hasn't already. "I should go, before they get here." "You can barely walk." "I can ride well enough." "And go where?" "You're still wanted. Mrs. Lockwood has either cleared your name or she hasn't. Until we know which, you're not safe anywhere." He turned to face her, and in the morning light she could see the worry in his eyes. "I won't put you at risk, Evelyn. You've done more than enough." "Let me decide what's enough for me," she said firmly. Then, softer, "Besides, where would you go that I'd know you were safe? At least here I can watch your back." "Why are you doing this?" The question was almost plaintive. "You don't owe me anything." "Maybe I'm doing it for me," she said. "Maybe I'm tired of being alone. Maybe I'm tired of being afraid. She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Maybe I'm falling for you," she didn't say. "Maybe in 3 days you've become more real to me than anyone has been in years. Maybe the thought of you riding away into danger makes my chest hurt in a way I can't explain. Maybe I just think it's the right thing to do," she finished instead. Cole reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." They stood there in the morning light, hands joined, and Evelyn felt the weight of possibility between them, of paths branching, of choices that would define everything that came after. Then, from outside came a sound that shattered the moment. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, coming fast up the road. Cole's hand tightened on hers. "They're here." Evelyn felt her heart begin to race, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Then we handle it. Together." She moved to get her father's rifle, checking it was loaded, while Cole stood by the window watching the riders approach. "How many?" she asked. "3. Decker's in front. I recognize his black gelding." "Then it's time to find out if Mrs. Lockwood made it to the sheriff," Evelyn said, and walked toward the door to face whatever came next, her rifle in hand and a wanted cowboy at her back, ready to defend the home her father had built, and the choice she'd made 3 nights ago in a storm. The story of Evelyn Carter and Cole Maddox was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. But as she opened that door to face Theodore Jackson's men, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. And for a woman who'd been alone for far too long, that made all the difference. The riders drew closer, and the Montana morning held its breath. and inside the Carter homestead, two people who'd been strangers 3 days ago stood together, prepared to face the storm that was coming. The one made not of snow and wind, but of men with guns and dark intentions. The moment of truth had arrived, and Evelyn Carter was ready. The three riders reined in their horses 30 yards from the house, their breath and the animal's breath creating clouds of vapor in the frigid morning air. Evelyn stood on her porch, the Winchester held loosely but ready across her body, and watched them with the same calm she'd used to assess approaching weather. The man in front sat his black gelding like he owned the world. He was thick-shouldered and mean-eyed, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw that gave his face a permanent sneer. This had to be Decker, the foreman Cole had described. The two men flanking him were younger, harder to read, but they carried themselves with the casual violence of men who'd done ugly work before and would do it again. "Morning," Decker called out, his voice carrying clear across the snow. "That's a fine welcome, pointing a rifle at visitors." "Visitors knock at a reasonable hour and wait to be invited in," Evelyn replied, her voice steady and cold as the air around them. "You're on Carter land uninvited. State your business or turn around." Behind her, just inside the doorway where he couldn't be seen but could hear everything, Cole had positioned himself with her father's old revolver. She'd given it to him despite his protests, and now she was glad she had. If this went wrong, they'd need every advantage. "Carter land, is it?" Decker's eyes swept over the homestead, assessing, calculating. "You'd be old George Carter's girl then. Heard he passed. Sorry for your loss." He didn't sound sorry at all. "I appreciate your condolences," Evelyn said flatly. "Now state your business." "We're looking for a man, fugitive, dangerous criminal named Cole Maddox. You seen anyone like that around here?" "I've seen 3 men who rode onto my property without permission, disturbing my morning. Beyond that, no." One of the younger riders shifted in his saddle, his hand drifting toward his gun. Evelyn's finger moved to the Winchester's trigger, a subtle shift, but one Decker caught immediately. He held up a hand, stopping his man. "Easy now," Decker said, though whether he was talking to his rider or to Evelyn wasn't clear. "No need for trouble. We're just doing our duty, looking for a criminal. This Maddox, he shot a man 3 nights ago. We got a right to search for him." "You have warrants?" Evelyn asked. "Papers from the sheriff authorizing you to search private property?" Decker's jaw tightened. "Don't need warrants to look for a murderer." "Actually, you do. This is America, not some feudal kingdom. Unless you've got papers from the sheriff giving you authority, you're just 3 armed men trespassing on a woman's property. Now I'll ask one more time. State your legal business or leave." The morning sun glinted off the snow, painfully bright, making Evelyn squint slightly. But she didn't lower the rifle, didn't break eye contact with Decker. "You're alone out here," Decker said, and there was a new edge to his voice, something that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Long way from town. Lot could happen to a woman alone." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Decker?" His eyes narrowed. "How'd you know my name?" "Because I asked who was likely to come onto my land making threats, and your name came up first," she lied smoothly. "You work for Theodore Jackson, and word is you do his dirty work. So yes, I know who you are, which means you should know that I'm not some frightened girl who'll fold because you ride up here trying to intimidate me." Inside, she heard Cole shift slightly, readying himself in case this turned violent. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but years of dealing with difficult cattle buyers and aggressive neighbors had taught her how to project calm she didn't feel. Decker studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was worse than his scowl. "You got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit don't stop bullets, Miss Carter. You sure you haven't seen Maddox? Maybe nursing a wounded man in that barn of yours? We saw smoke from your chimney, knew someone was home despite the storm. I'm here, as you can see, and I haven't seen your fugitive. Now, if you're done wasting my time, I've got animals to feed and work to do. Mind if we check your barn? Just to be sure?" "Yes, I mind. You have no legal authority here. You leave now, or I send my hired hand to town to fetch the sheriff, and we'll see what he has to say about Theodore Jackson's men harassing a lone woman." It was a bluff. She had no hired hand, but it worked. Decker's eyes flicked to the house, perhaps wondering who might be inside, how many people might be watching. The lie created uncertainty, and uncertainty was almost as good as an actual advantage. Your hired hand, Decker repeated slowly. That's so. That's so. He's inside right now, in fact, and he's got a clear shot at all three of you through that window. Another lie, but Cole was inside, and he did have a gun. So I'd suggest you do your searching elsewhere, Mr. Decker. There's a lot of Montana between here and the county line. I'm sure your fugitive is hiding somewhere, but it's not on Carter land. The standoff stretched out, tense as a drawn bowstring. Evelyn could feel sweat starting to bead on her back despite the cold, could feel her arms beginning to ache from holding the rifle ready, but she didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't give Decker any sign of weakness. Finally, Decker touched his hat in a gesture that was more mockery than respect. We'll be going then. But, Miss Carter, if I find out you're hiding Maddox, if I find out you lied to me this morning, there will be consequences. Mr. Jackson doesn't take kindly to people interfering in his business. And I don't take kindly to threats on my own land, Evelyn shot back. Now ride out before I decide you're trespassing with intent to harm and defend my property accordingly. Decker's face darkened with anger, but he wheeled his horse around with enough force to make it sidestep nervously. The other two riders followed, and together they cantered back down the road, throwing up sprays of snow. Evelyn watched them until they disappeared over the rise, her rifle still ready, her body still tense. Only when they were completely out of sight did she lower the Winchester, and only then did her hands start to shake. Cole appeared in the doorway immediately, moving faster than he should have given his injury. That was the bravest damn thing I've ever seen, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That was the stupidest damn thing I've ever done, Evelyn corrected, her legs suddenly weak. She sat down hard on the porch steps, the rifle across her knees. He could have shot me. They all could have shot me. But they didn't. Cole sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You faced down 3 armed men and sent them packing with nothing but a rifle and pure grit. And several lies about a hired hand, she added, then laughed shakily. God, my father would have been proud and furious in equal measure. Proud that I stood my ground, furious that I took such a risk. You saved my life, Cole said quietly. Again. Evelyn turned to look at him, really look at him. In the bright morning sun, she could see the dark circles under his eyes from pain and fever, the pallor that lingered from blood loss, the worry lines etched around his mouth. But she could also see the strength returning to him, the determination in his jaw, the way he looked at her like she was something miraculous. We don't know that yet, she said. They could come back. Probably will come back once Decker gets suspicious about why a woman alone would be so confident. Then we prepare for that. We? You think I'm leaving now? After you just faced down the men who want me dead? Cole shook his head. I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn. Not until this is resolved, one way or another. They sat there on the porch steps, the winter sun warming their faces, the vast white expanse of Montana stretching out before them. Somewhere out there, Decker was riding back to the Double J, reporting to Theodore Jackson. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Lockwood had either reached the sheriff with her story or hadn't. The next move was being made, and all Evelyn and Cole could do was wait. Tell me about her, Evelyn said after a while. Mrs. Lockwood, what kind of woman is she? Cole considered the question. Strong, stubborn, kind. She reminds me of you, actually. When her husband died, everyone expected her to sell out, move to town, live a respectable widow's life. She told them all to go to hell, politely, but the message was clear. That ranch was her home, and she wasn't leaving it. Sounds familiar, Evelyn murmured. She's got this garden, Cole continued, a small smile touching his lips. Even in the winter, she keeps it going in a greenhouse her husband built. Says tending living things keeps her sane. And she's got this way of looking at you, like she can see right through whatever front you're putting up to the truth underneath. She sounds remarkable. She is, which is why I couldn't let them burn her out. Some things you can't stand aside for. Some things you have to act even when it's dangerous, even when it might cost you everything. Evelyn understood that better than he knew. Do you think she made it to the sheriff? I don't know. Sheriff Matthews is a good man, but he's cautious. Jackson has a lot of influence in the county. If Sarah showed up with a wild story about attempted arson and a hand who turned traitor, Matthews might have been slow to believe her, or he might have believed her and decided he needed more evidence before acting. Or Jackson might have gotten to him first. Evelyn said quietly. Or that. They fell silent, both contemplating the possibilities, none of them particularly comforting. We should prepare, Evelyn finally said, standing and brushing snow from her skirt. If they come back, when they come back, we need to be ready. Over the next hours, they turned the Carter homestead into something resembling a fortress. Cole, despite his injury, helped her reinforce the doors and check the window latches. They moved supplies into the house, extra ammunition, food that wouldn't spoil, water from the well. Evelyn showed Cole the root cellar beneath the kitchen, accessed through a trapdoor hidden under a rug. If they come in force, she explained, you hide there. It's small, but they'd have to know to look for it. I'm not hiding while you face them alone. You're still wounded, you're wanted, and you're the one they're hunting. She met his eyes firmly. If it comes to it, you hide. That's not negotiable. You're a stubborn woman, Evelyn Carter. So I've been told. As the day wore on, they settled into a routine born of necessity. Evelyn did the outside work while Cole watched from the windows, his borrowed revolver always close at hand. She fed the animals, gathered eggs, broke ice on the water trough. Normal tasks, but performed with one eye always on the horizon, watching for riders. In the afternoon, Cole insisted on helping her split wood despite her protests. I can sit around being useless, or I can do something, he said. My choice. They worked side by side in the crisp air, the rhythm of the axe becoming almost meditative. Evelyn found herself watching the way Cole moved, still favoring his injured side, but strong and capable nonetheless. There was something comforting about having another person there, sharing the work, dividing the burden. You're staring, Cole said without looking up from the log he was positioning. I'm supervising. There's a difference. Is that what they call it? Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned away to stack the split wood. You're impossible. I'm wounded. You're supposed to be nice to me. Despite the tension of their situation, despite the danger still hovering over them, Evelyn laughed. It felt good, that laugh, like something tight in her chest loosening slightly. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in the small kitchen, moving around each other with surprising ease, Cole asked about her parents. What were they like? Your mother and father? Evelyn stirred the stew she was making, beef from the cow she'd butchered in the fall, vegetables from the cellar, herbs dried from last summer. My mother was the kindest person I ever knew. She could make anything grow, could gentle the wildest horse, could talk anyone down from anger. Papa used to say she was too good for this hard land, but she loved it here, loved the big sky, the freedom, the challenge of it. How did she die? Childbirth. She wanted to give Papa a son so badly. We didn't know there were complications until it was too late. By the time we got the doctor out from town, she was gone, and the baby with her. Evelyn's voice was steady, but her hands stilled in their work. I was 12, old enough to understand what we'd lost, young enough that it felt like the end of the world. Cole moved closer, his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder. I'm sorry. Papa never really recovered. Oh, he functioned, worked the land, raised me, taught me everything he knew, but something in him died with her. I think he spent the next 12 years just waiting to follow her. But he held on long enough to make sure you could survive alone. Yes. Evelyn resumed stirring, grateful for the simple task. He made sure I knew everything. How to shoot, how to treat injuries, how to bargain with buyers, how to read weather, how to doctor animals. He gave me every skill he had, like he knew I'd need them all. Sounds like he loved you very much. He did, and I loved him, which is why I can't let this place go, can't give up what he spent his life building, even if it means facing down men like Decker, even if it means harboring fugitives in your barn, Cole supplied gently. Even then. They ate dinner at the small table, their knees occasionally bumping in the confined space. It was strange, Evelyn thought, how quickly she'd grown accustomed to having him here. 3 days ago, she'd been alone in this house, and solitude had been her only companion. Now Cole's presence felt natural, felt right in a way that should have frightened her, but somehow didn't. Tell me something, Cole said as they cleaned up after the meal. Before all this, before Decker and the shooting and the storm, what did your days look like? Evelyn considered the question. Lonely, she admitted. I'd wake up, do the chores, maybe ride into town once a week for supplies. The neighbors are kind, but distant. Everyone's too busy with their own survival to spend much time socializing. Sundays I'd sit in church listening to Reverend Walsh talk about virtue and duty, and I'd count the minutes until I could leave. Then home, more chores, dinner alone, bed. Same thing the next day and the day after that. That sounds hard. It was existence, not living. I was so focused on surviving, on keeping the ranch running, that I forgot there was supposed to be more to life than just getting through each day. Cole dried the last dish and set it carefully on the shelf. And what would more look like to you? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken possibility. Evelyn turned to face him, leaning back against the counter. Someone to share the work with, she said slowly. Someone to talk to at the end of the day. Someone who saw me as a person, not just a woman alone who needs managing. Someone who... She trailed off, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Someone who what? Cole prompted softly. Someone who made me feel less alone, she finished in a whisper. Cole reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. You make me feel less alone too, he said. You make me feel like maybe I could be more than just a drifter, more than just a hired hand who moves from ranch to ranch, with nothing to show for it. Cole, I know, he said quickly. I know this is crazy. I know we barely know each other, and I'm wanted by dangerous men, and you've got a life here that doesn't include complications like me. But Evelyn, these past 3 days with you, they've been the most real thing I've experienced in years. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Evelyn's heart was racing, her hands trembling slightly. Every sensible part of her brain was screaming warnings. This was too fast, too dangerous, too uncertain. But another part of her, the part that had been lonely for so long, the part that was tired of being afraid and careful and alone, that part was singing a different song. You haven't lost me, she said. You're right here. Cole's hand slid from her cheek to cup the back of her head, his thumb tracing gentle circles. Can I kiss you? Instead of answering, Evelyn closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them feeling their way into this new territory. But then Cole's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, and Evelyn's hands fisted in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that felt inevitable, like coming home after a long journey. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole pressed his forehead to hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, Evelyn Carter. I think I've already fallen, she whispered back. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, the lamp burning low and casting golden light across the worn floorboards. Outside, the Montana night was cold and vast and full of danger, but inside, in that moment, there was warmth and possibility, and the fragile beginning of something that felt like hope. The spell was broken by a sound from outside, the distant whinny of a horse. They froze, listening. For a moment there was nothing, and Evelyn thought she'd imagined it. Then it came again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable crunch of hooves in snow. They're back, Cole breathed, already moving toward the window. Evelyn grabbed the Winchester while Cole doused the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. In the faint moonlight filtering through the windows, they could see riders approaching, more than 3 this time. At least 6, maybe more. The cellar, Evelyn hissed. Now. Evelyn, now, Cole, please. She saw the struggle play across his face, but finally he nodded. She helped him move the rug, lifted the trapdoor. The cellar below was dark and cramped, barely tall enough to stand in, but it was hidden and safe. Whatever happens, Cole said as he lowered himself down, don't let them hurt you. If it comes to it, tell them I was here. Tell them I forced you to help me. Don't take the blame for my choices. Shut up and hide, Evelyn said, but her voice was gentle. I'll handle this. She closed the trapdoor, replaced the rug, and had just picked up her rifle when fists pounded on the door. Open up! Decker's voice, angry now, done with pretense. We know he's in there! Evelyn took a breath, steadied herself, and opened the door with the rifle pointed at Decker's chest. This time, there was no careful distance maintained. Decker stood on her porch with 5 men behind him, all armed, all looking eager for trouble. In the moonlight, his scarred face looked demonic. "You lied to me this morning," Decker said, his voice low and dangerous. "We found boot prints near your barn, fresh prints, man-sized. You're hiding him. I told you this morning I hadn't seen your fugitive. That's still true." "Then explain the prints." "My hired hand, like I mentioned. He checks the barn at night for predators." "Your hired hand." Decker smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. "Then you won't mind if he comes out here and introduces himself?" Evelyn's mind raced. "He's not here. Sent him to town this afternoon for supplies." "In this snow? That's convenient." "What's convenient is you showing up with an armed gang in the middle of the night, making accusations without proof." "Sheriff Matthews wouldn't approve of this, Mr. Decker." At the mention of the sheriff, something flickered across Decker's face. Was it worry? Uncertainty? Before Evelyn could analyze it, he stepped forward onto the porch, and she raised the rifle higher. "One more step and I start shooting. I'm within my rights to defend my home against armed intruders." "You going to shoot all 6 of us, girl?" "I'll start with you and work my way through. Question is, are you willing to die to search my house?" They stood there, locked in confrontation, and Evelyn could feel the situation spiraling toward violence. Her finger tightened on the trigger, preparing for whatever came next. Then, from the darkness beyond the riders came a new voice, older, authoritative, used to being obeyed. "That's enough, Decker." Everyone turned. Another rider approached, moving his horse carefully through the snow. As he entered the circle of light from the porch lamp, Evelyn saw a man in his 50s, weather-beaten and stern, with a silver star pinned to his coat. Sheriff Matthews. "Sheriff," Decker said, and there was definitely worry in his voice now. "We were just harassing a young woman on her own property in the middle of the night?" The sheriff reined in beside Decker. "That what you were doing?" "We're looking for Cole Maddox. We have reason to believe—" "I know what you believe," Matthews interrupted, "and I know why you're looking for him. Question is, do you know that Sarah Lockwood rode into my office 2 days ago with a very interesting story?" The silence that followed was profound. Evelyn's heart leaped with hope, but she kept her expression neutral, her rifle steady. "Mrs. Lockwood is alive?" Cole's voice came from inside the house. He'd emerged from the cellar when he heard the sheriff. He appeared in the doorway behind Evelyn, the revolver in his hand. "She made it?" "She made it," Matthews confirmed, his eyes moving between Cole and Evelyn. "Rode through that storm half frozen but determined. Told me everything. About Jackson's plans to burn her out, about Decker here choosing his men, about you riding ahead to warn her and taking a bullet for your trouble." "That's a lie," Decker snarled. "Maddox is the one who—" "Save it," Matthews cut him off. "I've got 3 of your boys in custody already. They talked, Decker, gave you and Jackson up to save their own necks. I've got warrants for your arrest, for Theodore Jackson's arrest, and for the arrest of anyone involved in the attempted arson and attempted murder of Sarah Lockwood." Evelyn watched as the color drained from Decker's face. Around him, his men were looking at each other nervously, calculating their odds, wondering if loyalty to Jackson was worth fighting a lawman. "That's not how this is going to go," Decker said, his hand moving toward his gun. "We outnumber you, Matthews. You and this girl and that traitor Maddox, you don't have a chance." "Maybe not," Matthews agreed calmly. "But I didn't ride out here alone." From the darkness came the sounds of more horses, more riders. 6 deputies emerged from the tree line, all armed, all with rifles trained on Decker and his men. "Now then," Matthews continued, "you boys have a choice. You can come peaceful, stand trial, probably get a few years in territorial prison. Or you can draw on a lawman, which is a hanging offense, and die right here in Miss Carter's yard. Your choice, but you've got about 5 seconds to make it." One of Decker's men immediately raised his hands. "I'm done," he said. "I didn't sign on for murder or hanging." Another followed suit, then another. Within moments, only Decker remained defiant, his hand still hovering near his gun, rage and calculation warring in his eyes. "Don't be stupid, Decker," Cole said from the doorway. "It's over. Jackson's finished, you're finished. Take what mercy you can get." For a long moment, Evelyn thought Decker might draw anyway, might decide that dying in a gunfight was better than hanging. But finally, with a curse that made Evelyn grateful for the cold that kept her windows closed, he raised his hands. Matthews's deputies moved in quickly, disarming and binding Decker and his men. The sheriff himself dismounted and approached the porch, his eyes moving between Evelyn and Cole with something that might have been approval. "Miss Carter," he said, touching his hat, "I apologize for the disturbance. I've been tracking these boys since Mrs. Lockwood came to town, but they kept moving. When she mentioned you'd be on their likely search route, I came as fast as I could." "I appreciate that, Sheriff," Evelyn said, finally lowering her rifle. Her arms were shaking from holding it ready for so long. Matthews turned to Cole. "As for you, Maddox, you're clear. More than clear. Mrs. Lockwood called you a hero, said you saved her life. She's pressing charges against Jackson and Decker, and her testimony combined with what the other boys told us is enough to hang the lot of them." Cole sagged against the door frame, the relief visible in every line of his body. "She's really all right?" "She's fine. Staying at the boarding house in town, waiting to give her full statement. She asked about you, wanted to know if we'd found you safe." "I owe her everything," Cole said quietly. "You owe Miss Carter here too, I'd say," Matthews observed, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. Cole in a borrowed shirt, standing in Evelyn's doorway in the middle of the night, the way they stood close to each other despite the sheriff's presence. Nursing a wounded man through a blizzard takes courage, or foolishness. Sometimes both. "Sometimes both," Evelyn agreed, meeting the sheriff's eyes steadily. She wouldn't apologize for her choices, wouldn't act ashamed for helping someone in need. Matthews studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Your father raised a brave daughter, Miss Carter. Stubborn too, I'd wager. I've been told that once or twice." "Well, your stubbornness might have saved a good woman's life and brought down one of the worst operations in the county. Theodore Jackson's been running roughshod over folks for years, but he finally pushed too far." Matthews turned back to his deputies, who had Decker and his men secured. "We'll be heading back to town. I'll need statements from both of you tomorrow, if you're able to ride in." "We'll be there," Cole confirmed. After the sheriff and his prisoners had disappeared into the night, their hoofbeats fading into silence, Evelyn and Cole stood on the porch watching the empty road. The stars were brilliant overhead, cold and distant and beautiful, and the world felt suddenly full of possibility. "It's over," Evelyn said softly. "You're safe." "Thanks to you." Cole turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Evelyn, I meant what I said earlier. I'm falling in love with you. And now that I'm not a fugitive anymore, now that I'm free to make my own choices, I want to choose you, if you'll have me." Evelyn looked up at him, at this man who'd stumbled into her barn 3 nights ago and somehow changed everything. She thought about loneliness, about promises made to dying fathers, about the difference between existing and living. "I'll have you," she whispered. "Stay, Cole. Stay and help me build something here. Stay and make this place a home instead of just a burden I carry." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, a promise sealed with touch. And when they finally went back inside, closing the door against the cold Montana night, it was together. No longer 2 people alone, but 2 people finding their way towards something neither had dared hope for. The danger had passed, but the story was just beginning. Morning came soft and golden, the kind of Montana dawn that made the hardships of winter seem almost worthwhile. Evelyn woke in her own bed for the first time in days without the weight of fear pressing on her chest. The house was quiet, and for a moment she thought Cole might have left in the night, that perhaps the danger passing had broken whatever spell had held them together. But then she heard sounds from the kitchen, the clink of the coffee pot, the creak of the floorboards under familiar weight, and she smiled into her pillow. She dressed quickly, braiding her hair with practiced efficiency, and emerged to find Cole standing at the stove attempting to make breakfast. He'd clearly raided her pantry and was now staring at a pan of eggs with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. "They're just eggs," she said from the doorway, unable to suppress her amusement. He jumped slightly, then grinned sheepishly. "I can rope a steer and break a horse, but apparently cooking defeats me. I wanted to surprise you with breakfast." "Consider me surprised." She moved to his side, gently taking the spatula from his hand. "You've got them on too high heat. They'll burn." "See, this is why I need you," he said, and though his tone was light, there was sincerity underneath. They worked together in comfortable silence, Evelyn rescuing the eggs while Cole sliced bread and set the table. It felt domestic and natural, and Evelyn found herself imagining 1,000 mornings just like this one, stretching out into a future she hadn't dared contemplate before. Over breakfast, they discussed the practicalities of what came next. They needed to ride to Granite Creek to give their statements to Sheriff Matthews. Cole needed to collect his wages from the Double J, assuming Jackson hadn't already fled or hidden any money owed. And there were decisions to be made about the future, conversations that felt both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't have much to my name," Cole admitted, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. "Whatever Jackson owes me, plus maybe $40 saved, not exactly a fortune to build a life on." "I don't have much either," Evelyn replied. "This land, the animals, some savings my father left. We're not rich, but we have enough to survive if we're careful." "We," Cole repeated softly, and Evelyn realized she'd been saying it all morning. Not I or you, but we. The word felt right on her tongue. "Is that presumptuous?" she asked. "We barely know each other. Maybe once you're healed and free, you'll want to move on, find something better than a struggling homestead and a woman who's too stubborn for her own good." Cole reached across the table and took her hand. "Evelyn, I've been drifting for 10 years. Worked dozens of ranches, slept in 100 bunkhouses, never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. And in 3 days with you, I've felt more at home than in all those years combined. I'm not going anywhere unless you send me away." "I'm not sending you away," she said firmly. "But Cole, you need to understand what you're choosing. This isn't easy land. Winters are brutal. Summers can be just as hard. The work never ends, and the profit margins are thin. I'm barely keeping this place afloat alone." "Then it's good you won't be alone anymore." The simple certainty in his voice made something warm bloom in Evelyn's chest. She squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength that came from years of hard work. "We should go to town," she said. "Get this business with the sheriff settled. And I want to meet Mrs. Lockwood. Thank her for being brave enough to ride through that storm." "She'll like you," Cole predicted. "Two stubborn women who refuse to be pushed around. You'll get along like a house on fire." They saddled up an hour later, Evelyn on her father's old gelding Sam, and Cole on one of the Double J horses he'd ridden in on, technically stolen, but given the circumstances, Sheriff Matthews had indicated he'd overlooked that particular transgression. The ride to Granite Creek took nearly 3 hours through snow that was slowly beginning to melt under weak winter sun. The town was small, just a main street with a dozen buildings clustered around it like settlers circling wagons. There was Henderson's General Store, the Silver Spur Saloon, the boarding house, the church, the sheriff's office, and a handful of other establishments that served the scattered ranching community. Evelyn had been coming here since childhood, but today it felt different riding in with Cole beside her. People noticed. She could feel their eyes tracking them as they tied their horses outside the sheriff's office. "Let them look," Cole murmured, clearly sensing her discomfort. "They'll talk no matter what we do." Sheriff Matthews was waiting for them in his office, along with a woman Evelyn recognized from town, but had never formally met. Sarah Lockwood was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that held both kindness and steel. She stood when they entered, and her face lit up when she saw Cole. "Mr. Maddox," she said warmly, crossing to take his hands. "Thank God. I've been sick with worry since I rode out. Are you badly hurt?" "I'll heal, ma'am, thanks to Miss Carter here." Cole gestured to Evelyn. "Mrs. Lockwood, this is Evelyn Carter. She found me half frozen in her barn and saved my life." Sarah turned to Evelyn with frank assessment in her gaze. "Did she now? That took courage, Miss Carter. Not many would risk harboring a wounded stranger with Decker on the hunt." "He needed help," Evelyn said simply, "and he was trying to do the right thing. That counted for something." "It counted for everything," Sarah replied, and Evelyn found herself being pulled into an unexpected embrace. "Thank you. Thank you for protecting him, for giving him shelter. He saved my life, and you saved his. That makes us family in my book." Evelyn returned the embrace, surprised by the sudden emotion welling up in her throat. She'd been alone for so long that the simple warmth of female companionship, of connection, felt overwhelming. The next hours were spent giving detailed statements to Sheriff Matthews. Cole recounted everything from the moment he'd overheard Decker's plans to the moment he'd been shot escaping Sarah's ranch. Sarah corroborated his story, adding her own harrowing tale of riding through the blizzard to reach town. Evelyn described finding Cole, the confrontations with Decker, everything she could remember. Matthews took notes with methodical care, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, he sat back and studied them over steepled fingers. "Jackson's already left the territory," he said. "Ran the moment he heard I had Decker in custody. Got a wire out to neighboring sheriffs, and he'll be caught eventually. But his empire's done. The Double J is being liquidated to pay debts and restitution. Decker and his boys will stand trial next month. It'll be quick, given how many of them are talking to save their own necks." "What about the others?" Cole asked. "The hands who weren't involved in any of this. They'll be out of work." "Some already found new positions. Others are waiting to see who buys the Double J when it goes to auction." Matthews paused. "You could bid on it, Maddox. You've got a reputation as a good hand, and with Mrs. Lockwood's testimony about your character, a bank might extend credit." Cole laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With what collateral, Sheriff? I've got $40 and a borrowed horse." "You've got more than that," Sarah interjected. "You've got my gratitude, which I can express in the form of a loan if you're interested. My husband left me better off than folks realize, and I'd be honored to invest in your future." "Mrs. Lockwood—" "Sarah, please." "Sarah, I can't accept." "You can and you will," Sarah said firmly. "Consider it a business investment. You helped me keep my ranch. I'll help you start yours. Fair trade." Evelyn watched the exchange with growing understanding. Sarah wasn't just offering charity. She was offering Cole a chance to be his own man, to build something permanent. But she also saw the conflict in Cole's face, the pride warring with practicality. "What about expanding the Carter homestead instead?" Evelyn heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. "I mean, my place needs work. The barn needs repairs. I could use more grazing land. Another well would help in dry summers. If Cole and I were to, that is, if we—" She faltered, suddenly aware she was proposing something in front of witnesses that she and Cole had barely discussed in private. "If you were to marry and combine resources?" Sarah supplied gently, a knowing smile on her face. "Yes," Evelyn managed, her cheeks burning. "That." Cole was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Evelyn Carter, are you proposing to me in the sheriff's office?" "I'm proposing a practical business arrangement," she said, but her voice shook slightly. "We both need help. We both want to build something. Together we could—" She didn't get to finish because Cole crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her soundly, right there in front of the sheriff and Sarah Lockwood and God and everyone. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Yes," he said simply, "yes to all of it. The partnership, the marriage, the building a life together. Yes." Sheriff Matthews cleared his throat. "Well then, I suppose congratulations are in order. Though you might want to talk to Reverend Walsh about making it official before you start living in sin and giving the church ladies fodder for gossip." "The church ladies already have enough to gossip about," Evelyn said, but she was smiling, her hand clasped tight in Cole's. "But yes, we'll talk to the Reverend." Sarah was beaming at them both. "This is wonderful, and my offer stands. Whatever you need to improve the Carter place, to make it profitable for 2 people building a life, I'm happy to help. Call it a wedding present if loan makes you uncomfortable." They spent another hour working out details with Sarah and the sheriff. There were forms to sign, statements to be witnessed, plans to be made. By the time they emerged back onto the main street, the winter sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "We should stay in town tonight," Cole suggested. "Get a room at the boarding house, let you rest before the ride back. And we can talk to Reverend Walsh in the morning." "Together?" Evelyn asked. "We're not married yet. People will talk." "People are already talking. I saw at least 3 curtains twitch while we were in the sheriff's office." He pulled her close, heedless of whoever might be watching. "Besides, I'm done caring what people think." "Are you?" Evelyn thought about the past 3 months of loneliness, of caring too much what the church ladies thought, of trying to be respectable, and proper and acceptable. She thought about Cole bleeding in her barn, about facing down Decker's men, about choosing courage over caution. "I'm done," she agreed. They took a room at the boarding house. 2 rooms, actually, propriety be damned, but not completely abandoned. Mrs. Chen, who ran the establishment, gave them a knowing look but asked no questions. Over dinner in the boarding house dining room, they were joined by Sarah, who regaled them with stories about her late husband and the early days of her ranch. "Henry was the dreamer," she said fondly, her eyes distant with memory. "I was the practical one who kept us fed while he planned grand expansions. But we balanced each other out. That's what you need in a partnership, balance. Someone to dream and someone to make sure the dreaming doesn't bankrupt you." "Which one am I?" Cole asked with a smile. "You're both, I suspect," Sarah replied. "You're a dreamer who's practical enough to act on conscience even when it's dangerous. And Miss Carter here is practical but brave enough to take risks when it matters. You'll do well together." After dinner, Evelyn and Cole walked the quiet streets of Granite Creek, their breath misting in the cold air. The town was settling in for the night, lights appearing in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. "Are you scared?" Cole asked as they paused on the bridge that crossed Granite Creek itself, the waterway that gave the town its name, now frozen solid. "Terrified," Evelyn admitted. "I'm choosing to tie my life to someone I've known for 4 days. That's insane." "Completely insane," Cole agreed. "Want to back out?" "No." She turned to face him, taking both his hands. "No, because sometimes the heart knows things the head hasn't figured out yet. And my heart knows you, Cole Maddox. Knows you're good and brave and kind. Knows you're someone I can build a life with. So yes, I'm terrified, but I'm also sure." "I'm sure too," he said, pulling her close. "I've never been more sure of anything." They stood there on the bridge, holding each other under the vast Montana sky, and Evelyn felt something shift inside her, a letting go of fear, an opening up to possibility. Her father had told her once that the bravest thing a person could do was choose love despite all the reasons not to. At the time, she'd been 12 and he'd been talking about her mother, but now she understood what he meant. Morning brought Reverend Walsh, a kindly older man who'd known Evelyn since she was a child. They met him at the church, a small white building with a simple cross on top, and explained their situation. "I'll be honest with you," Walsh said, his weathered face thoughtful. "The congregation will have opinions. A woman alone taking in a strange man, then marrying him days later, it will cause talk." "Let them talk," Evelyn said firmly. "Reverend, you knew my father. You know he raised me to think for myself, to stand by my convictions. I'm standing by them now. Cole Maddox is a good man who saved a woman's life and nearly died for it. I love him, and I'm going to marry him. The only question is whether you'll perform the ceremony." Walsh studied them both for a long moment, then smiled. "Your father would be proud of you, Evelyn. And yes, I'll perform the ceremony." "When were you thinking?" "As soon as possible," Cole said. "We've got a homestead to run and not much time before spring planting. No point in delaying." "Next Sunday, then," Walsh decided. "I'll publish the banns this week, give the gossips something to chew on, and we'll have a proper wedding on Sunday morning. Will that suit?" "That will suit perfectly," Evelyn agreed. They rode back to the homestead that afternoon, the winter sun bright overhead and the snow beginning to melt in earnest. Evelyn felt lighter than she had in months, as if some burden she hadn't known she was carrying had finally been set down. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm that felt like a preview of the life they were building. Cole took over the heavier tasks around the homestead, repairing the barn roof that had been leaking, splitting enough wood to last until spring, fixing the fence that the winter winds had damaged. Evelyn tended the animals, managed the household, and began planning for spring planting. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Cole told her about his childhood in Kansas, about the restlessness that had driven him west, about his dreams of someday having land of his own. Evelyn shared memories of her parents, stories about growing up on the homestead, her fears about failing to honor her father's legacy. "You're not failing," Cole assured her one evening as they sat close together on the old settee. "You're adapting. Your father wanted you to keep the land, to make it thrive. You're doing that, just not alone anymore." "I keep thinking he would have liked you," Evelyn said softly. He always said the measure of a man was what he did when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain. You rode into danger to save Sarah when you had everything to lose. That would have mattered to him. I hope I get the chance to prove worthy of his daughter, Cole replied, kissing her forehead gently. They maintained careful propriety during that week. Cole slept in the main room on a pallet by the fire, Evelyn in her own bed behind a closed door. But the anticipation built between them like spring tension, the awareness of what Sunday would bring, adding sweetness to every glance, every accidental touch. Sarah rode out midweek with a wagon full of supplies. She brought fabric for a dress. Every bride deserves something special, she insisted, along with food for a wedding breakfast and her own particular brand of practical advice. Marriage isn't always easy, she told Evelyn as they worked together in the kitchen, Cole having made himself scarce to give them privacy. There will be hard days, times when you question why you chose this. But if you remember that you're partners, that you're working towards something together, you can weather anything. How did you and your husband manage? Evelyn asked, cutting vegetables for stew. We talked about everything. Money, plans, fears, hopes. We didn't let resentments fester, and we never went to bed angry. Life's too uncertain to waste time on grudges. Sarah paused in her work. Henry died suddenly, Evelyn. One moment he was alive and planning our future, the next he was gone. I'd give anything for one more day with him, one more conversation. So my advice is this. Don't waste the time you have. Love fiercely, fight fair, and never take a single day for granted. Evelyn found herself blinking back tears. Thank you, Sarah, for everything, for being brave enough to go to the sheriff, for believing in Cole, for helping us now. You gave me back my future when you saved Cole, Sarah said, pulling Evelyn into an embrace. He gave me back my home, and you gave him back his life. We're bound together now, the three of us. That's family. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of perfect winter day that Montana occasionally granted, as if in apology for all the harsh ones. Evelyn dressed carefully in the new dress Sarah had helped her make. Simple but beautiful, dark blue wool that brought out her eyes, with careful stitching at the collar and cuffs. She braided her hair and coiled it at the base of her neck, tucking in small sprigs of dried lavender from her mother's garden, saved from last summer, one of the few things she had left of her mother's careful cultivation. Looking at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the tired, lonely figure who'd trudged through her days. In her place was someone who looked alive, hopeful, ready for whatever came next. Cole had stayed in town the previous night to maintain propriety, so she rode to church with Sarah, who'd insisted on accompanying her. The church was fuller than Evelyn had expected. Apparently the entire congregation had turned out for the wedding, curiosity overriding any other plans. She saw Mrs. Henderson in the third pew, her face pinched with disapproval. Saw the Johnsons, their neighboring ranchers, looking pleased and supportive. Saw familiar faces from town, some friendly, some judgmental, all present to bear witness. And then she saw Cole standing at the altar with Reverend Walsh, and everything else faded away. He'd gotten a new shirt somehow, dark and clean, probably borrowed from the general store. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaved, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his face transformed with a smile so full of love and wonder that Evelyn felt her breath catch. She walked toward him alone. There was no one to give her away, her father gone, and no male relative to perform the traditional duty. But she didn't feel alone. She felt like she was walking toward her future, toward the life she was choosing with clear eyes and a full heart. When she reached the altar, Cole took her hands and whispered, "You're beautiful." "You clean up well yourself," she whispered back, and saw him fight a smile. Reverend Walsh began the ceremony with traditional words, talking about marriage as a sacred covenant, about the responsibilities and joys of building a life together. Evelyn heard the words, but she was focused on Cole's hands holding hers, on the solid reality of him standing beside her. When it came time for vows, Walsh asked Cole to repeat after him. "I, Cole Maddox, take thee, Evelyn Carter, to be my wedded wife," Cole said, his voice strong and clear and certain. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part. Then it was Evelyn's turn, and she met Cole's eyes as she spoke. I, Evelyn Carter, take thee, Cole Maddox, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Walsh smiled at them both. The rings? Cole produced 2 simple gold bands. Where he'd gotten them, Evelyn didn't know, but they were perfect. He slipped one onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, and she did the same for him, the weight of the ring on her hand feeling both foreign and absolutely right. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and Almighty God, I now pronounce you man and wife, Walsh declared. Cole, you may kiss your bride. Cole cupped Evelyn's face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, a promise sealed before God and witnesses. When they parted, both were smiling through tears, and the congregation applauded despite Mrs. Henderson's audible sniff of disapproval. They walked back down the aisle together. No longer 2 separate people, but something new. A partnership, a team, a family. Outside the church, Sarah was waiting with well wishes and tears of her own, along with several other townspeople who offered congratulations. Even Mrs. Henderson approached, though her smile was tight. I hope you know what you're doing, Evelyn dear, she said in a tone that suggested she thought otherwise. I do, Mrs. Henderson, Evelyn replied firmly. I know exactly what I'm doing. The wedding breakfast was held at Sarah's ranch, which was closer to town than the Carter homestead. She'd prepared a feast, roasted chicken, fresh bread, preserves, and even a small cake she'd somehow managed to bake. A handful of guests attended, mostly neighbors and the few townspeople who genuinely wished them well. Cole was warmly welcomed by the men, who'd heard about his actions saving Sarah and approved of his courage. The women were more reserved, especially toward Evelyn, but Sarah's obvious approval helped smooth some of the social awkwardness. As the afternoon wore on and guests began to depart, Evelyn found herself standing on Sarah's porch, looking out at the snow-covered landscape, still trying to absorb the fact that everything had changed. She was married. She had a partner. She was no longer alone. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Ready to go home, Mrs. Maddox? Mrs. Maddox. The name sent a thrill through her. Yes, she said, turning in his arms to face him. Let's go home. They rode back to the Carter homestead, their homestead now, in the late afternoon light, the sun turning the snow gold and pink. When they arrived, Cole insisted on carrying her over the threshold despite her protests. Tradition, he said, sweeping her up into his arms. Humor me. She laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her inside. He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood there for a moment, suddenly shy with each other now that they were truly alone as husband and wife. I don't know what to do now, Evelyn admitted with a nervous laugh. This is my house, our house, but it feels different suddenly. It feels like home, Cole said, pulling her close. For the first time in my life, I'm in a place that feels like home. He kissed her then, deeper than the chaste kiss in the church, and Evelyn felt heat bloom through her body. They had the whole night ahead of them, the whole future stretching out. No more propriety, no more sleeping in separate rooms, just the 2 of them, building a life together. Later, as darkness fell and they lay together in the bed that had been her father's but was now theirs, Evelyn traced the scar on Cole's side where Decker's bullet had torn through. Does it still hurt? She asked softly. Sometimes, he admitted, but it's worth it. If I hadn't been shot, I wouldn't have stumbled into your barn. I wouldn't have found you. Do you believe in fate? Evelyn asked. That things happen for a reason? I believe in choices, Cole replied, his hand stroking her hair gently. I chose to help Sarah. You chose to help me. We chose each other. That's not fate. That's us deciding who we want to be. I choose you, Evelyn whispered. Every day, I'll choose you. And I choose you, Cole replied, holding her closer. Every day. For the rest of our lives. Outside, the Montana wind sang through the pines, and snow fell soft against the windows. Inside, 2 people who'd been alone had found each other, had chosen each other, had built something new from the ashes of their separate pasts. The road ahead would be hard. They both knew it, but they would walk it together, and that made all the difference. The storm that had brought Cole to Evelyn's barn had passed, but in its wake, it had left something precious. A love built on courage, a partnership forged in adversity, and a future full of possibility. The Carter homestead was no longer a burden carried alone, but a home being built by two people who understood that the greatest strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together. And as they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, both felt the same certainty, that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them side by side, their lives intertwined as surely as their fingers were now, holding tight and refusing to let go. The first weeks of marriage were an education in compromise and discovery. Evelyn woke each morning to the unfamiliar warmth of another person beside her. And though she'd lived alone for months, she found herself adjusting to Cole's presence with surprising ease. He was an early riser like her, up before dawn to tend the animals, and they fell into a natural division of labor that played to both their strengths. Cole took over the repairs that had been mounting since her father's death, fixing the leak in the barn roof that Evelyn had been patching with increasingly creative solutions, reinforcing the chicken coop against predators, mending harnesses and tack that were worn to the point of danger. Evelyn managed the household and the animals, her practiced efficiency keeping them fed and warm through the tail end of winter. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments of friction, small collisions between two people learning to share space and decisions. Like the morning Cole rearranged the tools in the barn without asking, putting everything in what he considered a more logical order. "I can't find anything now," Evelyn said, frustration sharp in her voice as she searched for the wire cutters. "I had a system." "Your system had hammers mixed in with garden tools and ropes stored 3 different places," Cole replied, looking up from the saddle he was oiling. "This makes more sense." "It makes sense to you. To me, it's chaos. I knew where everything was." "Where it was made no sense, Evelyn. It made sense to me and my father. This is—" She stopped, hearing her voice rising, seeing Cole's jaw tighten. They were about to have their first real fight over tool storage, which was absurd. She took a breath, forcing herself to calm. "Can we compromise? You show me your new system, and if there are things I really need in specific places, we adjust?" Cole's shoulders relaxed. "That's fair. I should have asked before changing everything. I'm sorry." "I'm sorry too. For snapping, it's just, this is still my father's place in my head, and having things different feels like losing another piece of him." Cole set down the saddle and came to her, pulling her into an embrace. "We're not erasing him, Evelyn. We're building on what he created. There's a difference." She pressed her face into his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and wood smoke, and something uniquely Cole. "I know. It's just hard sometimes." "Then we'll figure it out together. That's what we do now." They worked through the tool organization together that afternoon, Cole explaining his reasoning while Evelyn pointed out why certain things needed to be readily accessible from specific work areas. The final result satisfied neither of them completely, which Sarah later told them was the hallmark of good compromise. Sarah had become a frequent visitor, riding over every few days with supplies, advice, or just company. She and Evelyn had developed a fast friendship, and Cole clearly viewed her as something between a mentor and an aunt. On one particularly cold afternoon in late February, she arrived with news that changed everything. "The Double J goes to auction next week," she announced over coffee at Evelyn's kitchen table. "Banks finally settled all the claims against Jackson's estate. They're selling the land, the cattle, everything." "Who's expected to buy?" Cole asked, his interest clearly piqued despite his earlier assertions that they couldn't afford to expand. "A couple of ranchers from the next county over are the front runners. But I've been thinking." Sarah set down her cup and looked at them both seriously. "The Double J borders both our properties. If someone unfriendly buys it, we could end up with water access problems, grazing disputes, all manner of complications. Better the devil you know than the one you don't." "Sarah, we can't afford to buy the Double J," Evelyn said gently. "We're barely managing as is." "But what if we went in together? A partnership? We pool resources, bid on the property, and if we win, we split it 3 ways. My land connects to the southern portion, yours to the northeast. Between us, we could create one of the largest combined operations in the county." Cole leaned back, his expression thoughtful. That's ambitious and risky. What if we can't make it profitable? What if we can? Sarah countered. Evelyn, your father's land has good water and excellent summer grazing. Cole, you know cattle and operations from working the Double J. I've got capital and connections to markets. Together, we have everything we need to succeed. Evelyn felt the familiar flutter of fear and excitement that came with big decisions. This was so much larger than anything she'd imagined, so much more risk than the careful survival she'd been managing. But it was also opportunity, the chance to build something substantial instead of just hanging on. How much would we need to bid? She asked, and saw Cole's surprise that she was even considering it. Sarah pulled out papers covered in calculations. I estimate we'd need at least $5,000 to be competitive. I can put up $3,000. If you two could manage $2,000 between your savings and what the bank might lend against your property, we'd have a fighting chance. That's everything we have, Cole said quietly. If we lose the bid, we'd be risking Evelyn's homestead for nothing. And if we don't bid, someone else gets the Double J, and we spend the rest of our lives dealing with whatever they decide to do with it, Evelyn replied. She looked at her husband, reading the caution in his eyes, understanding it. But she also saw the flicker of hope, the same hope she was feeling. Sarah's right. This is an opportunity. A risk, yes, but maybe one worth taking. This is your family land, Cole said. Your decision has to be the final one. I won't push you into risking what your father built. Evelyn thought about her father, about his willingness to take calculated risks, about how he'd always said that standing still was the same as moving backward. She thought about the promise she'd made to him, to keep the land and make it thrive. Sometimes thriving meant growing. We bid, she decided. But we're smart about it. We set a maximum and we don't go over it no matter what. We're not going to bankrupt ourselves on pride. Sarah smiled, clearly pleased. Then we have a week to get our finances in order and prepare. I'll talk to the bank about the partnership structure. Cole, you should ride over to the Double J and look at the cattle that are included in the sale. Assess their condition and value. Evelyn, we'll need to go through the property records and understand exactly what we're bidding on. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Cole spent 2 days at the Double J, going through the remaining cattle with a critical eye and talking to the few hands who'd stayed on, hoping the new owner would need help. He came back with detailed notes and a grudging respect for what Jackson had built, if not for the man himself. The cattle are good quality, he reported to Evelyn and Sarah as they sat around the kitchen table reviewing everything. Maybe 200 head, mostly Herefords. The grazing land is excellent in the summer, marginal in winter but manageable. The buildings need work but they're sound. If we get it for our target price, it's a solid investment. And if we go over our target price? Evelyn asked. Then we're paying for potential rather than current value, which is risky but not insane. But Evelyn's right. We need a hard limit. They set their maximum at $5,500, agreeing that anything beyond that put too much pressure on their combined resources. Sarah would handle the actual bidding, as she had the most experience with such matters, and wouldn't let emotion drive the price up. The auction was held on a Friday morning at the county courthouse in Granite Creek. Evelyn dressed carefully, wanting to project confidence and success, even though her stomach was churning with nerves. Cole wore his Sunday suit, looking uncomfortable but determined. They rode in together, meeting Sarah at the courthouse steps. The room where the auction was held was packed with ranchers, speculators, and curious townspeople. Evelyn recognized many faces: Mr. Johnson from the neighboring ranch, the Patterson brothers who ran cattle in the Southern Valley, several men she didn't know who had the look of serious buyers about them. The auctioneer was a fast-talking man from the territorial capital who clearly wanted to get through the proceedings quickly. He started the bidding at $3,000, and immediately hands went up around the room. The price climbed quickly: $4,000, $4,500, $5,000. Evelyn felt Cole's hand find hers under the table, grounding her. Sarah sat calm and composed, her paddle ready but not yet raised. At $5,200, several bidders dropped out. At $5,400, only 3 remained: Sarah, the Patterson brothers, and a man Evelyn didn't recognize in expensive Eastern clothes. $5,500, Sarah bid, her voice clear and firm. $56, the Easterner countered immediately. Sarah hesitated, and Evelyn's heart sank. They'd agreed. $5,500 was their limit. Going higher was foolish, irresponsible. But she also felt the opportunity slipping away, felt the future they'd imagined disappearing. 56, going once, the auctioneer called. Sarah looked back at Evelyn and Cole, a question in her eyes. This was the moment. Play it safe or take a leap? Evelyn thought about her father's voice, about his belief that fortune favored the bold. She thought about the life she wanted to build with Cole, about refusing to be small and scared. She nodded. 5,700, Sarah bid. The room went quiet. The Easterner studied Sarah, then Evelyn and Cole, calculating whether they had the resources to back up the bid. After a long moment, he shook his head and dropped his paddle. 5,700, going once, going twice, sold to Mrs. Sarah Lockwood and partners. The gavel came down, and just like that, they owned the Double J. The paperwork took hours. They signed documents until Evelyn's hand cramped, agreeing to terms and payment schedules and partnership structures that made her head spin. By the time they emerged from the courthouse, the winter sun was already sinking toward the horizon. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice slightly dazed. "We actually did it." "We went 200 over our limit," Cole said, but he was smiling. "We're either brilliant or insane." "Can it be both?" Evelyn asked, and found herself laughing with a mix of euphoria and terror. They'd just committed to debt that would take years to pay off, to work that would consume their lives, to a gamble that could either make or break them. Cole pulled her close, kissing her soundly right there on the courthouse steps. "We're going to make this work," he said with absolute certainty, "whatever it takes." The next months proved just how much work making it work required. They divided their time between the two properties, Cole spending long days at the Double J, organizing the cattle and operations while Evelyn managed their original homestead. Sarah coordinated between both, her business acumen proving invaluable as they negotiated with buyers, hired hands, and planned for spring. They hired back 3 of the former Double J hands who'd been decent men caught in Jackson's schemes. With Cole's recommendation and Sarah's willingness to give them a second chance, they became the core of their operation. There was Miguel, a Mexican vaquero who knew cattle better than anyone Cole had ever met. There was young Tommy Patterson, barely 20 but willing to work harder than men twice his age. And there was old Pete, who'd been with the Double J for 30 years and knew every inch of the land. "Mr. Maddox," Pete said the first day Cole officially took over as foreman, "I just want to say I'm glad it's you running things now. Mr. Jackson, he never understood that you treat land and animals right. They'll treat you right back. You do, I can tell." Cole, uncomfortable with the praise, just nodded. "We're going to do things different here, Pete. Fair wages, honest work, and no one gets asked to do anything that's not right. We clear on that?" "Clear as Montana sky, sir." By March, the snow was melting in earnest, and the land was transforming from white to brown to the first hints of green. Evelyn and Cole barely saw each other some days, both consumed with the endless work of running 2 ranches simultaneously. When they did come together in the evenings, they were often too exhausted to do more than eat, share brief updates, and fall into bed. "I miss you," Evelyn said one night as they lay in the dark, too tired even to light a lamp. "We're married and living in the same house, but I miss you." "I miss you too," Cole admitted, pulling her close despite his exhaustion. "This isn't what I imagined when we said our vows." "What did you imagine?" "More time together, working side by side, building something instead of just scrambling to keep up with what we bought." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes because she'd been thinking the same thing. "Did we make a mistake with the Double J?" "No," Cole said firmly. "We made a choice that's harder than we expected, but that doesn't make it wrong. We just need to figure out how to make this sustainable. We can't keep running ourselves into the ground." They talked long into the night, planning and strategizing. They needed to hire more help, to better divide the labor, to set boundaries so they weren't working from before dawn until after dark every single day. It would mean spending more of their limited capital on wages, but as Sarah pointed out when they discussed it with her, they couldn't build an empire if they killed themselves first. "You two are young and strong, but you're not invincible," she said with the bluntness of someone who cared. "I watched my Henry work himself to exhaustion, and I won't watch you do the same. We hire the help we need, we divide the work sensibly, and we remember that we're doing this to build a life, not just an operation. They hired 2 more hands and a woman named Clara to help with the cooking and household work at the Double J, where they decided to establish their main operation once the house was properly repaired. Clara was a widow herself, practical and unflappable, and she took charge of the domestic sphere with efficiency that freed Evelyn to focus on the business side of things. As spring progressed into summer, the rhythm of ranch life began to feel less chaotic and more purposeful. They moved cattle to summer grazing, branded the new calves, repaired fences, and slowly transformed the Double J from Jackson's poorly managed operation into something they could be proud of. Evelyn found herself taking on more of the business management, discovering she had a head for numbers and negotiations that surprised everyone, including herself. She worked with Sarah to establish contracts with Eastern buyers, getting better prices for their beef than Jackson ever had. She managed the books, tracked expenses, and made sure they were actually making money instead of just working hard. Cole thrived as foreman, his natural leadership and knowledge of cattle making him respected by the hands. He was fair but firm, quick to praise good work, and willing to get his hands dirty alongside the men. Under his management, the cattle grew healthier and more productive, and the land began to recover from years of overgrazing. But the best moments came when they could steal time together, riding out to check on distant pastures with just the 2 of them, sitting on the porch of the Double J house after everyone else had gone to bed, sharing meals and stories and laughter. One evening in late June, they rode up to a high pasture to check on a group of cows that were due to calve soon. The view from the ridge was spectacular. Miles of rolling grassland dotted with cattle, the mountains purple in the distance, the sky turning gold and pink as the sun set. "Look at this," Cole said, his arm sweeping across the vista. 6 months ago, I was a drifter with nothing to my name. Now I'm looking at land I own, we own, and cattle that are ours and a future I can actually see. Evelyn leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth. 6 months ago, I was alone in my father's house, wondering how I'd make it through another winter. Now I have a partner, a business, friends, a life that feels worth living. Do you regret it? Any of it? The risk? The work? The chaos? Not for a second, she said honestly. It's hard, but it's ours. We're building something real, Cole. Something that will last. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. I love you, Evelyn Maddox. Every stubborn, courageous, brilliant part of you. I love you too, she whispered back, even when you rearrange my tools. He laughed and kissed her as the sun painted the sky in shades of fire, and the land around them hummed with life they'd helped create. In that moment, everything, the risk, the work, the fear, the exhaustion, all of it felt worthwhile. By August, they were finally seeing real profit. The cattle sale brought in enough to pay down significant debt and leave a cushion for winter preparations. They celebrated with a dinner at Sarah's ranch, just the 3 of them, toasting their success with wine Sarah had been saving for a special occasion. To partnerships, Sarah said, raising her glass, and to taking chances that pay off. To family, Evelyn added, because that's what they'd become. Not bound by blood, but by choice and shared struggle. To the future, Cole finished, and they all drank. As summer faded into autumn, Evelyn began to notice changes in herself. She was tired more easily, felt queasy in the mornings, found her emotions closer to the surface than usual. She dismissed it at first as exhaustion from the relentless pace they'd been keeping. But when she missed her monthly cycle for the second time, she knew. She told Cole on a September evening, after they'd finished checking the cattle in the south pasture. The aspens were turning gold, and the air had that crisp quality that spoke of coming winter. They sat on a fallen log, watching the herd graze peacefully, and Evelyn took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. There's going to be 3 of us come spring, she said softly. Cole went completely still, his hand motionless under hers. For a moment she worried about his reaction. They'd never discussed children, had been too caught up in survival and then in building the operation. But then he turned to her, and his face was transformed with wonder. A baby? His voice cracked slightly. We're going to have a baby? We're going to have a baby, she confirmed, and found herself laughing through sudden tears. Cole pulled her into his arms so tightly she gasped, then immediately loosened his grip. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Are you okay? Is the baby okay? Should you even be riding? God, Evelyn, you've been working so hard. Is that... I'm fine, she interrupted, laughing at his sudden panic. Women have been having babies while running ranches since ranches existed. I'm healthy, strong, and the doctor says everything looks perfect. You've already been to the doctor? When? Last week, when I went to town for supplies. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Cole's hand returned to her stomach, gentle and reverent. A baby, he repeated, as if trying to make it real. Our baby. Are you happy? Evelyn asked, suddenly needing to hear him say it. Happy? He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Evelyn, I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful and about a dozen other things I don't have words for. But yes, I'm happy. So incredibly happy. They sat there as the sun set and the cattle grazed and the aspen leaves whispered in the breeze, planning for a future that suddenly felt more real than ever. They talked about names and nurseries, about how they'd managed the work when Evelyn was further along, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. I want our child to know both struggle and joy, Evelyn said. I want them to understand the value of hard work, but also to have more choices than I did, more freedom to become whoever they're meant to be. We'll give them that, Cole promised. We'll give them everything we can, a home, a legacy, parents who love each other and them. We'll give them what I never had, and what my mother never got to give my brother, Evelyn added softly. We'll build the family she dreamed of. The news brought joy to everyone around them. Sarah cried when they told her, pulling Evelyn into a fierce embrace. A baby, she kept saying, a new generation. Oh, this is wonderful. Clara immediately began knitting blankets and planning how to convert one of the upstairs rooms at the Double J into a nursery. The ranch hands grew protective, insisting that Evelyn not lift anything heavy or ride the more spirited horses. Even old Pete, who'd seemed incapable of sentiment, was caught whittling a small wooden horse for the little one. As autumn progressed, they prepared for both the coming winter and the coming spring, laying in extra supplies, making sure the houses were weatherproofed, organizing the work so Evelyn could gradually do less as her pregnancy advanced. She fought against being coddled at first, insisting she was perfectly capable, but eventually accepted that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. By October, news reached them that the trial for Decker and the others had concluded. All were found guilty, with Decker receiving the harshest sentence, 20 years in territorial prison. Theodore Jackson had been captured trying to cross into Canada and would face his own trial in the spring. Justice, it seemed, had finally caught up with them. It's over, Cole said when Sarah brought the news. Really, truly over. It was over the moment Matthews arrested them, Evelyn replied. This is just the official end. Our real story, the one we're writing together. That's just beginning. Winter came early that year, snow falling in October and settling in for the long Montana cold. But the Carter-Lockwood Maddox operation, as they'd officially named their partnership, was ready. The cattle were in winter pasture with plenty of hay stored. The houses were tight and warm. The books balanced with money in the bank. On Christmas Eve, they gathered at Sarah's ranch for dinner. Evelyn and Cole, Sarah, the ranch hands, and Clara, all the people who'd become their extended family. They ate roasted goose and drank hot cider, and when Clara brought out a cake decorated with careful icing, they sang and laughed and told stories late into the night. Evelyn, her pregnancy now visible beneath her dress, felt Cole's hand rest on her stomach and felt the baby kick in response, the first time he'd felt it move. The wonder on his face made her heart swell. Your father would be proud, Sarah said softly, coming to sit beside Evelyn as the party continued around them. Of all of this, the ranch, your courage, the family you're building, he'd be so proud. I hope so, Evelyn replied. I think about him all the time, wonder what he'd make of how things turned out. He'd make of it that his daughter is exactly who he raised her to be, strong enough to stand alone but wise enough to choose partnership, brave enough to take risks but grounded enough to make them pay off. He'd see Cole and know his daughter chose well. He'd see this baby coming and know his legacy continues. Sarah squeezed her hand. And he'd see you happy, Evelyn. That would matter most. Later, as they rode home through falling snow, Cole asked what she'd been thinking about during the party. Everything, Evelyn admitted. How different this Christmas is from last year, when I was alone and scared and wondering if I could survive. How much has changed since that night you stumbled into my barn, half frozen and bleeding. How one choice to help a stranger led to all of this. Do you think it was fate? Cole asked. That night, the storm, everything? I think it was chance, Evelyn said thoughtfully. Chance that brought you to my barn. But everything after, that was choice. I chose to help you. You chose to stay. We chose each other, chose to build something together, chose to take risks and work hard and create this life. That's not fate. That's us. I like that better, Cole agreed. Means we built this ourselves. We did, Evelyn said firmly, and we're not done building yet. The winter passed in the rhythm they'd grown accustomed to. Work and rest, planning and preparing, moments of joy interspersed with moments of challenge. Evelyn's pregnancy progressed normally, though the last months were harder than she'd anticipated. By February, she was uncomfortable and impatient, ready to meet the child she'd been carrying. Cole grew increasingly nervous as her due date approached, hovering and fussing until Evelyn finally snapped at him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. They had their first real fight since the tool organization incident, voices raised and frustrations aired. But they talked through it, as Sarah had taught them, and came out the other side stronger for having learned to fight fair. I'm scared, Cole admitted after they'd made up. My mother died in childbirth. I know that was years ago and things are better now, but Evelyn, if something happened to you, nothing's going to happen to me, she said firmly, though she understood his fear. Her own mother had died the same way. I'm strong, the baby's healthy, and we've got the best doctor in the county lined up. But Cole, you can't protect me from everything. Some things we just have to face and trust that we'll be okay. I know, he said quietly. I just love you so much. The thought of losing you won't lose me, she interrupted, pulling him close. We've come through too much together. I'm not leaving you to raise this baby alone, I promise. It was a promise she would keep, though not without struggle. When her labor started on a March morning with spring just beginning to touch the land, it was long and difficult. Claire and Sarah were with her, along with Dr. Morrison from town. Cole paced outside the bedroom for hours, his imagination conjuring every terrible possibility, until old Pete finally took pity on him and forced him to help with evening chores as a distraction. 20 hours after her labor began, as dawn was breaking on a new day, Evelyn gave birth to a daughter. The baby came into the world screaming her outrage at the indignity of birth, strong and healthy and perfect. When Cole was finally allowed into the room, he found Evelyn exhausted but radiant, holding their daughter with tears streaming down her face. He knelt beside the bed, looking at the tiny person they'd created, this impossible miracle of dark hair and squinched face and miniature fingers that wrapped around his with surprising strength. Meet your daughter, Evelyn said softly. Hope Carter Maddox. Cole looked up at her questioningly. Hope? Because that's what you gave me, Evelyn explained, her voice thick with emotion. That night in the barn, when I chose to help you, I was choosing hope over fear. And hope led us here, to this family, this life. It seemed right. Cole kissed his wife's forehead, then his daughter's, overwhelmed with love and gratitude and the fierce protectiveness he now understood his own father must have felt, however imperfectly expressed. Hope, he agreed. It's perfect. She's perfect. And as the sun rose fully on that March morning, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and pink, 3 people became a family, bound together by choice and love and the stubborn determination to build something lasting in a hard land. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but what it had created remained, strong and growing stronger, rooted deep in Montana soil, reaching toward a future full of promise. Hope's arrival transformed the ranch in ways both expected and surprising. The tiny nursery they'd prepared at the Double J became the heart of the house, and the hardened cowboys who worked the land proved unexpectedly gentle with the baby girl who'd stolen all their hearts. Miguel fashioned a cradle from smooth pine that rocked with barely a touch. Tommy carved her name into a wooden sign for above her door. Even old Pete, gruff and weathered by 70 Montana winters, could be found singing old trail songs to her when he thought no one was listening. Evelyn had worried about managing motherhood alongside ranch management, but she discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She learned to nurse hope while reviewing account books, to soothe a fussy baby with one hand while signing contracts with the other. Clara proved invaluable, helping with both the household and the baby, giving Evelyn the freedom to remain involved in the operation without sacrificing time with her daughter. Cole was transformed by fatherhood. The man who'd once drifted from ranch to ranch with nothing tying him down now rushed home each evening, eager to hold his daughter, to hear about every small milestone, her first smile, the way she'd tracked a dust mote with her eyes, how she'd gripped Sarah's finger with surprising strength. He would sit for hours just watching her sleep, wonder written across his face. "I never knew," he said one evening as they sat together on the porch, hope sleeping against his chest. "I never knew I could love something this much, that I could feel this complete." "She's a miracle," Evelyn agreed, reaching over to stroke her daughter's soft dark hair. "Our miracle." As spring gave way to summer, the ranch thrived under their careful management. The calves born that season were strong and healthy, the pastures recovered beautifully from Jackson's years of overgrazing, and their reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing spread throughout the territory. Buyers began seeking them out rather than the reverse, willing to pay premium prices for the Carter Lockwood Maddox brand. Sarah continued to be their partner in every sense, but she'd also become something more, a grandmother to Hope in all but blood, a confidant and advisor, a bridge between their young ambition and the wisdom of experience. She spent more time at the Double J than her own ranch as the months passed, eventually admitting that the loneliness of her own homestead had become oppressive. "I'm rattling around in that house like a dried pea in a pod," she confessed one afternoon as she rocked Hope while Evelyn prepared dinner. "I never minded it when Henry was alive, but now every room echoes with his absence. I find myself riding over here just to hear voices, to feel like I'm part of something living and growing." "Then move in," Evelyn said impulsively. "We've got plenty of room in this big house, and God knows we could use your help with Hope when we're both busy. It would be good for all of us." Sarah looked up with such hope in her eyes that Evelyn knew the offer had been the right one. "You mean that? You wouldn't mind an old woman underfoot?" "You're not old, and you'd never be underfoot," Cole said from the doorway, having heard the conversation. "Sarah, your family. This ranch exists because of you. Your faith in us, your investment, your wisdom. Having you here full-time would be an honor." So Sarah moved into the Double J that July, bringing her most treasured possessions and finally letting go of the house where she'd lived with Henry. She took the large bedroom on the first floor, the one with windows facing east toward the sunrise, and set about making it her own while still maintaining the ranch's careful order. The house felt more complete with 3 generations under one roof. Sarah would sit with Hope while Evelyn and Cole worked, singing old songs and telling stories about Henry and the early days of their ranch. She taught Evelyn recipes that had been passed down through her family, helped plan for the coming winter, and provided perspective when the challenges of running such a large operation threatened to overwhelm them. By autumn, Hope was 6 months old, sitting up on her own and showing clear preferences for people and activities. She adored Miguel, who would carry her around the barn showing her the horses and speaking to her in soft Spanish. She was fascinated by the cattle, her eyes going wide at the sight of the massive animals. And she was absolutely devoted to her parents, her face lighting up whenever Cole came home and settling most peacefully in Evelyn's arms. One September evening, after Hope had been put to bed and Sarah had retired to her room, Evelyn and Cole sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The air was crisp with the promise of coming cold, and the land stretched out before them, thousands of acres of success they'd built from desperation and determination. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning?" Cole asked, his arm around Evelyn's shoulders. "When Decker came with his men, and you faced them down with nothing but a rifle and pure courage?" "I said a lot of things that morning," Evelyn replied. "Most of them probably foolish. You told him that unless he had papers from the sheriff, he could turn around and leave. You stood there on this porch, well, the other porch, But still, and you refused to be intimidated. That's when I knew. Knew what? That you were extraordinary. That I was falling in love with you. That if I survived all of this, I wanted to spend my life watching you face down the world with that same fierce courage. Evelyn turned to look at him, seeing the man he'd become over these months. No longer the wounded fugitive in her barn, but someone grounded and purposeful, a husband and father and partner in every sense. And has it been what you imagined, this life we've built? It's been better, Cole said honestly. Harder, but better. More real. Evelyn, every morning I wake up and for a second I can't believe this is my life, that I have you and hope and this land and work that matters, that I'm not just drifting anymore but building something that will outlast me. We're building it together, she corrected gently. That's what makes it matter. They sat in comfortable silence until Cole spoke again, his tone shifting to something more serious. I got a letter today. Letter from the territorial prison warden. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. About Decker? He's up for early release consideration. Good behavior, overcrowding, some legal maneuvering his lawyer managed. They're asking if we want to submit statements about his potential parole. The name Decker still carried weight, still brought back memories of those terrifying nights when armed men had threatened everything they were trying to build. But those memories felt distant now, like events that had happened to different people in another life. What do you want to do? Evelyn asked. Cole was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Part of me wants to fight it, wants him to serve every day of his sentence for what he tried to do. But another part of me thinks about hope, about the life we're building, about moving forward instead of staying anchored to the past. What he did was wrong, and he's paid for it. If he's genuinely reformed, maybe he deserves a chance to rebuild his life like we rebuilt ours. That's generous of you, Evelyn said. More generous than I feel. When I think about him threatening us, about what could have happened. But it didn't happen. We won. We built this despite him, not because of him. He can't hurt us anymore, Evelyn. He's just a man who made terrible choices and is paying the price. If keeping him locked up doesn't make us safer or better, then maybe it's time to let go. They decided to submit a neutral statement, neither advocating for nor opposing his parole, simply recounting the facts and leaving the decision to those whose job it was to make such determinations. It felt like closing a door on that chapter of their lives, acknowledging that the frightened, desperate people they'd been that winter night were gone, replaced by people who'd faced their fears and emerged stronger. News came in October that Theodore Jackson had been found guilty on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. His financial empire was completely dismantled, his name synonymous with corruption throughout the territory. The judge had been particularly harsh, noting that Jackson had betrayed the trust that came with power and wealth, using both to harm those weaker than himself. Justice, Sarah said when they received the news, her satisfaction evident. Henry always said that evil men eventually hang themselves with their own rope. Jackson finally got what he deserved. The victory felt hollow to Evelyn, though. Yes, Jackson had been punished, but his actions had destroyed lives, disrupted communities, and caused suffering that no prison sentence could undo. She thought about Sarah's husband, about the stress Jackson's schemes must have caused, about whether that stress had contributed to his death. Some wounds went too deep for justice to heal. As if reading her thoughts, Sarah reached over and squeezed her hand. "Don't waste energy on bitterness," she said gently. "Henry wouldn't want that, and neither should you. We won, Evelyn. Not just in court, but in life. We took what Jackson tried to destroy and made it flourish. That's the best revenge there is." Winter arrived with the first snow in early November, and with it came a different kind of richness to their lives. The frantic pace of the warmer months gave way to the slower rhythm of cold season, maintaining the cattle, keeping the buildings repaired, planning for spring. There was time for family dinners that stretched late into the evening, for teaching Hope to crawl on the warm kitchen floor, for Cole to read aloud while Evelyn mended and Sarah knitted. Christmas that year was magical in a way that surpassed even the previous year's celebration. Hope was old enough to be delighted by the decorated tree, by the paper that crinkled and tore, by the wooden toys the ranch hands had made for her. They hosted Christmas dinner at the Double J, inviting everyone who'd become part of their extended family: Miguel and his wife Maria, Tommy and his new fiancée, Old Pete and Clara, and several neighbors who'd helped them throughout the year. The table groaned under the weight of roasted turkey and ham, fresh bread and preserved vegetables, pies and cakes that Sarah and Clara had spent days preparing. They ate until they were stuffed, then sat around the fire telling stories and singing carols while Hope passed from lap to lap, soaking up the attention. "A toast," Sarah said as the evening wound down, raising her glass of cider. "To family. Not always bound by blood, but always bound by choice. To the year past and the year ahead. To courage, to perseverance, and to the stubborn refusal to give up even when the odds seem impossible." "To family," everyone echoed, and Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes at the beauty of it. All these people gathered in warmth and love, connected by the choices they'd made to stand together. Later, after the guests had departed and Hope was asleep, Evelyn stood in the nursery watching her daughter breathe, overwhelmed by love and gratitude. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That a year ago I was so scared," Evelyn admitted. "Scared of failing, of being alone, of not being enough. And now look at us. Look at what we've built. Sometimes it feels like a dream I'm afraid to wake up from." "It's not a dream," Cole assured her. "It's real. We made it real. Every hard decision, every risk, every moment of doubt, they all led here, to this life, to this family. And Evelyn, we're just getting started." Spring returned with its usual dramatic transformation, the land exploding from white to brown to vibrant green almost overnight. Hope took her first steps in April, toddling between Cole and Evelyn with determined concentration before collapsing in giggles into her father's arms. She was talking, too, simple words that grew more complex each day, her personality emerging bright and bold and utterly her own. The ranch continued to prosper. Their reputation spread beyond Montana, and they began shipping cattle to markets as far as Chicago and Kansas City, commanding prices that made all their early struggles worthwhile. They paid off the last of their debt that summer, 3 years ahead of schedule, and celebrated by finally purchasing the piece of land between the original Carter homestead and the Double J, consolidating their operation into one continuous holding. Evelyn found herself thinking often of her father during this time, wishing he could see what they'd built, knowing he would be proud. She brought Hope to the cemetery on a warm June day, letting her daughter toddle among the headstones while she knelt by her parents' graves. "Papa, Mama," she said softly, one hand on each marker. "I want you to meet your granddaughter. This is Hope. She's got your stubbornness, Papa, and I think she has Mama's gift with growing things. She's already trying to help me in the garden. I married a good man, a man you would have liked. He's made this land thrive in ways I couldn't have done alone. I kept my promise to you. The Carter name still means something here. Our family continues." Hope toddled over and patted the gravestone with her small hand, as if she understood the significance. "Gampa," she said clearly, one of her newest words. Evelyn gathered her daughter close, tears streaming freely now. "Yes, baby, Grandpa. He would have loved you so much." That summer, they received an unexpected visitor, a lawyer from the territorial capital with news about Jackson's assets. As part of his sentencing, Jackson had been ordered to provide restitution to those he'd harmed. After all debts and legal fees were settled, there was a surplus to be divided among his victims. Sarah was receiving a substantial sum, and there was money designated for Cole as well, compensation for wrongful termination and the danger he'd faced. "It's $2,500, the lawyer explained, laying out papers for Cole to sign. "More than Jackson wanted to give, but the judge was insistent that you be compensated for your courage in protecting Mrs. Lockwood." Cole stared at the figure in disbelief. $2,500 was more money than he'd earned in 10 years of cowboying. It was a fortune, a chance to expand even further, to secure their future in ways he'd never imagined. "What do you want to do with it?" Evelyn asked that evening as they discussed the windfall. "We could add to the herd, improve the buildings, save it against bad years." "I want to invest it in people," Cole said slowly, an idea clearly forming. "We've been successful because people took chances on us. You, Sarah, the hands who stayed loyal, the neighbors who helped. What if we started a fund to help other ranchers who are struggling? Young families trying to start out, widows trying to hold on, people who just need a helping hand to get through." Evelyn felt her heart swell with love for this man who'd stumbled into her barn with nothing and now wanted to give everything away. "The Maddox Fund?" she suggested. "The Carter Maddox Fund," he corrected. "Your father started all this with his land and his legacy. Let's honor that." They established the fund that autumn, working with the bank in Granite Creek to create a loan program for struggling ranchers. The terms were generous: low interest, flexible repayment, and a focus on helping people who showed initiative but lacked capital. Within a year, they'd helped 5 families stay on their land, and the program had garnered enough attention that other successful ranchers began contributing as well. "This is your real legacy," Sarah said when the first family they'd helped sent a letter of thanks along with their first payment. "Not the acres or the cattle, but the lives you're changing. Henry would say you're paying it forward, and that's the highest calling there is." Time continued its inexorable march. Hope grew from toddler to little girl, bright and curious and fearless. She learned to ride before she was 5, sitting in front of Cole on his saddle, learning to read the land and the animals with the natural ease of someone born to ranching. She also learned numbers and letters from Evelyn and Sarah, showing an aptitude for learning that suggested she'd have every choice her mother had lacked. On Hope's 5th birthday, they threw a party that brought together the entire community: ranchers from 3 counties, townspeople from Granite Creek, all the hands and their families. There was food and music, games and laughter, and Hope presided over it all with the unselfconscious joy of a child who'd been raised in love and security. Miguel's wife, Maria, pulled Evelyn aside during the festivities. "You know what people say about you and Mr. Cole?" she asked in her accented English. "I'm afraid to know," Evelyn replied with a laugh. "They say you're proof that good things come to good people, that your ranch prospers because it's built on kindness and courage, not greed and cruelty. My Miguel, he tells everyone that working for you restored his faith in people after what Mr. Jackson did." Maria's eyes were bright with emotion. "Thank you for giving us a home here, Mrs. Maddox, for treating us like family." "You are family," Evelyn said firmly, embracing the other woman. "All of you are." That summer brought news that stopped everyone in their tracks. Montana was being considered for statehood. The territory had grown enough in population and economic stability that Congress was debating admission to the Union. Statehood would mean more autonomy, better infrastructure, increased investment. It would mean legitimacy for the ranches and businesses that had carved civilization out of wilderness. "We'll be part of history," Cole said as they read the newspaper reports. "Our children will grow up in a state, not a territory. They'll have opportunities we couldn't have imagined." The thought of children, plural, made Evelyn smile, because she was carrying another secret, another baby due in the winter, a sibling for Hope. She'd known for weeks but had been waiting for the right moment to tell Cole. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach, just as she had the first time. "They'll have each other too," she said softly. "Hope's going to be a big sister." Cole's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, joy, worry, and finally settling on determined happiness. "Another baby," he breathed. "Evelyn, is everything—" "I'm fine, the baby's fine, and this time I know what to expect," she assured him. "We're going to have 2 children, Cole. Our family is growing." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with the careful strength of someone who understood how precious and fragile everything was. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love our life, our family, everything we've built. I love that you chose me that night in the barn. I love that you keep choosing me every day." "And I always will," Evelyn promised. Their son was born on a February morning when the world was white with fresh snow and the air was sharp enough to hurt. He came faster than Hope had, arriving with less drama and more efficiency, as if eager to join the family that had been waiting for him. They named him George, after Evelyn's father, with the middle name Henry for Sarah's husband. George Henry Maddox was dark-haired like his sister, but he had Cole's blue eyes and his father's calm temperament. Hope was instantly smitten, wanting to help with everything, singing to her baby brother and bringing him toys even though he was far too young to appreciate them. "We're complete now," Cole said as they sat together watching their children, Hope playing quietly nearby while George nursed. "This is everything I never knew I wanted." But life, Evelyn had learned, was never truly static. It continued to unfold in surprising ways, bringing new challenges and new joys in equal measure. The ranch continued to grow, their reputation spreading until they were consulted by other operations throughout the territory. Sarah remained vital and engaged, helping raise the children and manage the business with the wisdom of her years. Montana achieved statehood in November of 1889, becoming the 41st state in the Union. The celebration in Granite Creek lasted 3 days, and the Maddox family was at the center of it. Respected members of the community, their success story held up as an example of what hard work and integrity could achieve. On the night of the statehood celebration, as fireworks lit up the sky over Granite Creek, Evelyn found herself standing apart from the crowd, looking up at the display with tears in her eyes. Cole found her there, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the November chill. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pulling her close. "That night," she said simply, and he knew immediately which night she meant. "The storm, finding you in the barn, making the choice to help you. If I'd turned you away, if I'd been too afraid or too cautious, none of this would exist. Not our marriage, not our children, not the life we've built." "You were brave when being brave meant risking everything," Cole said. "That's who you are, Evelyn. That's who you've always been." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Every moment I was terrified. But I did it anyway." "That's what courage is. Being scared and doing the right thing regardless." He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face in the darkness. "You saved my life that night. But more than that, you gave me a life worth living. Everything I am, everything we've built, it started because you said, 'Who'd I tell?' and pulled a stranger in from the cold." Evelyn laughed through her tears, remembering those words, the absurdity and honesty of them. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Cole corrected. "The best was saying yes when I asked you to marry me. I proposed to you, remember, in Sheriff Matthews' office." "I seem to remember it differently." They stood there arguing playfully about who had proposed to whom, while around them the town celebrated statehood and their children played with other children, and Sarah watched over everyone with the satisfaction of someone who'd helped build something lasting. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow, as years always do. Old Pete passed away peacefully in his sleep at 75, having lived long enough to see the ranch he'd helped build become one of the most successful in the state. They buried him on a hill overlooking the pastures he'd loved, and every hand on the ranch attended the funeral. Miguel eventually bought his own small spread with money saved from years of fair wages, though he continued to work closely with the Maddox operation. Tommy married his sweetheart and had 5 children, raising them on land purchased through the Carter Maddox Fund. Sarah lived to see both Hope and George grown, lived to see Hope become a teacher who brought education to rural communities, lived to see George take over management of the ranch with the same dedication his parents had shown. She died in her sleep at 78, peaceful and content, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her back. They buried her next to Henry on her old ranch, the land she'd fought so hard to keep. The funeral drew people from throughout the state, ranchers she'd helped, families who'd benefited from the fund, young people she'd mentored. It was a testament to a life well lived, to the ripples one person's courage could create. As Evelyn stood by the grave, now 45 years old, with threads of silver in her dark hair, she thought about the interconnection of lives, about how Sarah's desperate ride through a blizzard had set everything in motion. If Sarah hadn't reached the sheriff, if she'd been caught or turned back, Cole would have died wanted, and Evelyn would have remained alone. Every life they'd touched, every person they'd helped, every choice they'd made, it all traced back to that night and Sarah's courage. Hope, now 21 and recently engaged, came to stand beside her mother. "Tell me the story again," she said softly, "about how you and Papa met." Evelyn smiled because this story had been told countless times, had become family legend, but she never tired of telling it. "It was the coldest night of the worst winter I'd ever seen," she began, and Hope leaned against her shoulder, listening to the familiar tale as if hearing it for the first time. That evening, back at the Double J with the whole family gathered, Cole asked Evelyn to come outside with him. They walked to the barn, not the original Carter homestead barn where they'd met, but the large, well-maintained structure that housed their operation now. But in spirit it was the same, and Cole led her to the back corner where feed was stored. "This is where you found me," he said. Though the location was different, the barn was different. Everything was different except the two of them. 26 years ago, you found a half-frozen cowboy in your barn and changed both our lives. We changed each other's lives, Evelyn corrected. I've been thinking about Sarah, about legacy, about what we leave behind, Cole continued, and I realize that our legacy isn't the land or the cattle or even the fund, though those matter. Our legacy is the story, the proof that one choice made in courage can change everything, that helping a stranger can lead to love, that taking risks can lead to reward, that refusing to be afraid can lead to a life beyond imagining. That's a good legacy, Evelyn agreed, her hand finding his in the familiar way of long marriage. So I want to do something, Cole said. I want to write it down, the whole story, so that long after we're gone, people will know, not just our children and grandchildren, but anyone who needs to hear that courage matters, that kindness matters, that choosing hope over fear can change your life. The story of the cowboy in the barn, Evelyn said with a smile. The story of the woman brave enough to bring him inside, Cole corrected. Will you help me write it? Make sure I get it right? So they began that winter, sitting together on cold evenings, reconstructing the story from memory and emotion. They wrote about the storm, about desperation and fear, about choices made when everything hung in the balance. They wrote about facing down dangerous men, about building a partnership, about learning to love and be loved. They wrote about Sarah's courage and sacrifice, about the hands who'd become family, about a community that had welcomed them despite their unconventional beginning. They wrote it for Hope and George, for their future grandchildren, for anyone who might need to hear that impossible situations could have happy endings if you were brave enough to reach for them. On a spring morning when Evelyn was 52 and Cole was 58, they finished the manuscript. Their hands were more weathered now, marked by decades of ranch work, but they still fit together perfectly as they signed their names at the bottom of the final page. Do you regret any of it? Cole asked, echoing a question from years earlier. The risk? The work? The hard times? Not for a second, Evelyn replied, the same answer she'd given then, still true now. Every moment, every choice, every struggle, they all led here. To this life, this family, this legacy. How could I regret any of it? That summer, Hope married a lawyer from Helena in a ceremony that brought together everyone they'd helped over the years. George, now 23, had brought home a young woman named Emma, who was clearly the love of his life. The ranch was thriving under his management, incorporating new techniques while honoring the traditional values his parents had instilled. As Evelyn watched her children and their partners dance at Hope's wedding, Cole's arm around her waist, she felt the completeness of it. The story that had begun in fear and desperation had grown into joy and abundance. Not perfect joy, not life without challenges, but something real and earned and deeply satisfying. We did it, she said to Cole as the party swirled around them. We built something lasting. We're still building it, he replied. Every day we're still building. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and with them came the natural progression of life. Grandchildren arrived, Hope had 3, George had 4, and the ranch adapted to include another generation. The big house at the Double J rang with children's laughter once more, and Evelyn found unexpected joy in being grandmother, in teaching her grandchildren the same skills her father had taught her, in watching them grow wild and free on the land their family had fought to keep. On the 20th anniversary of Sarah's death, they established a scholarship in her name for young people from rural Montana who wanted to pursue education. The first recipient was a girl from a homesteading family, bright and ambitious but lacking resources. When she came to thank them, tears in her eyes, Evelyn saw herself at that age, full of potential but constrained by circumstances. You're giving me a chance, the girl said. No one's ever given me a chance before. Someone gave us a chance once, Evelyn replied. We're just paying it forward. As Cole and Evelyn moved into their 60s, they gradually stepped back from daily ranch management, turning over more responsibility to George while remaining available for guidance and wisdom. They spent more time traveling, visiting Hope and Helena, exploring parts of Montana they'd never seen, occasionally venturing beyond the state to see more of the country they'd helped tame. But they always came back to the ranch, to the land that had demanded so much and given so much in return. They would sit on the porch of the Double J house on summer evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky while cattle grazed peacefully and grandchildren played in the yard, and feel the deep contentment of people who'd lived fully and well. If you could go back, Cole asked one such evening, his hand in hers as it had been for 40 years, to that night in the barn, knowing everything that would come after, the struggles, the risks, the work, would you still help me? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Every time. 1,000 times over. Because yes, there were struggles, but there was also love and family and a life richer than anything I imagined alone in my father's house. You didn't just give me partnership, Cole. You gave me purpose, adventure, joy. You gave me everything. You gave me a home, Cole replied simply. A place to belong, a reason to be better than I was. Everything I am because you said, "Who'd I tell?" and refused to let fear win. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something inseparable, their lives so intertwined that neither could imagine existence without the other. Cole died peacefully at 78, in his sleep beside Evelyn, his hand still holding hers. He simply didn't wake up one autumn morning, passing from sleep to death so gently that Evelyn didn't realize he was gone until she turned to kiss him good morning and felt the stillness of his chest. The funeral was attended by hundreds, family, friends, hands, people they'd helped, people who'd heard their story and been inspired by it. George gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about his father's courage, his kindness, his unwavering love for his family, and the land they'd built together. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, beside a plot reserved for Evelyn. The marker read, "Cole Maddox, beloved husband, father, and friend. He chose courage." Evelyn lived another 5 years without him, years she filled with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were just beginning to arrive. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still consulting on ranch decisions, still mentoring young ranchers, still telling the story of the storm and the cowboy and the choice that had changed everything. On her 80th birthday, surrounded by 4 generations of family, someone asked her what advice she'd give to young people just starting out. "Be brave," she said without hesitation. "Not fearless. Fear is natural and often wise, but brave enough to act despite fear. Brave enough to help strangers, brave enough to take risks for what matters, brave enough to build instead of just survive." She paused, looking around at all the faces, her children, their children's children, all of them existing because one winter night she'd chosen courage over caution. And choose good partners, not just in marriage, though that too, but in business, in friendship, in life. Choose people who share your values, who'll stand beside you when things are hard, who'll celebrate with you when things are good. Nothing worth building can be built alone. Evelyn died on a spring morning, much like the one when Hope had been born, when the world was transforming from brown to green and the air smelled of new beginnings. She went peacefully, surrounded by family, her hand held by Hope as she'd once held her mother's hand so many years ago. They buried her beside Cole on the hill, and the marker read, "Evelyn Carter Maddox, beloved wife, mother, and pioneer. She chose love." At the funeral, George stood to speak about his parents, but Hope stopped him. "Let me tell the story," she said. "The real story, the one they wrote together." So Hope stood before the assembled crowd and told the tale that had become legend in their family, about a blizzard and a barn, about a wounded cowboy and a courageous woman, about choices made in desperation that led to love and legacy. She told it the way her parents had written it, with honesty and emotion. And when she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. That's who they were, Hope concluded. People who chose courage, who chose each other, who chose to build something lasting even when it would have been easier to quit. Everything we have, this ranch, this family, this community, exists because one winter night, my mother found a stranger in her barn and said, "Who'd I tell?" and brought him inside. Because my father chose to protect someone weak even when it endangered him. Because they both chose love over fear, partnership over isolation, hope over despair. She paused, looking out at the crowd, at the land her parents had loved, at the legacy they'd built. And that's the story I'll tell my children, and they'll tell theirs, and on until the end of time. Because some stories deserve to be remembered. Some love deserves to be celebrated. Some courage deserves to be honored. Hope smiled through her tears. Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Papa, for everything, for the story, for the love, for the life you built that allowed us all to flourish. Your legacy lives on in every person here, in every acre of this land, in every life you touched. You rest now, together, as you were always meant to be. We've got it from here. And they did. The ranch continued under George's management and eventually his children's. The Carter Maddox Fund grew to help hundreds of families throughout Montana. Hope's teaching legacy spread education throughout rural communities. The story of the cowboy and the barn became Montana legend, told and retold, inspiring others to choose courage when faced with impossible choices. Years later, decades later, when Montana celebrated its centennial as a state, a historian tracked down the manuscript Cole and Evelyn had written. It was published as a small book, distributed throughout the state, and became required reading in Montana schools. The story of how one woman's courage in the face of fear had built an empire of love and legacy resonated across generations, inspiring countless people to face their own storms with the same determination. And on the hill where Cole and Evelyn rested side by side, wildflowers grew thick each spring, purple lupine and yellow balsam root and red Indian paintbrush, painting the earth in colors as vivid as the sunset that first evening when they'd admitted their love for each other. The cattle still grazed in the valley below, the land still stretched out vast and beautiful, and the ranch that had been built on courage and hope and stubborn determination continued to thrive generation after generation. Some stories end. But the best ones, the ones built on truth and courage and love that refuse to surrender to fear, those stories never really end. They transform, evolve, continue in the lives they touch and the legacy they leave. And on cold Montana nights, when the wind howls like it did that winter so long ago, locals swear you can sometimes see two figures standing on the porch of the old Double J house, holding hands and watching the sunset, still building their life together even in memory, still proving that the bravest thing a person can do is choose hope when despair seems easier, choose love when isolation feels safer, choose to help a stranger even when the world says to turn away. Because that's what Evelyn Carter and Cole Maddox did, one frozen winter night in a barn, and it changed everything.